The story begins with how a young girl, not sparing her own health and strength, after 3 months of continuous work in the 007 agency, unexpectedly died of overwork. The good news for the young girl was that she managed to be reborn. And the bad news is that she was reborn as a supporting character in one rather famous novel. The young man who was the main character of that novel was a cold-blooded, heartless, and damn attractive man, beaten all over his head. But it was hard to resist his attractiveness. She was reincarnated into the supporting character Jong-mo Lee, who should have died a tragic death, which would speed up the relationship between the main characters of this novel. After realizing her role, the young girl almost went crazy. After all, this role was too difficult and unpleasant for her, and what's worse is that in the end, she will still have to die. This novel was called 7 Nights with a Wolf as a Cute Pet. And from the amount of bloodshed in this novel, it had no equal among all that the girl once had to read. The novel was about the bloodshed between the heroine Su Ming-shu, the very own CEO Lee Han-ting, and the gentle hero Su Ming-shu. However, she was only a minor character there. The eldest daughter of the Jong-mo Lee family was Gu Xiuji's fiancé from the beginning, but later broke off the engagement and married Lee Han-ting because of her great love for him. Later, Jong-mo Lee learns that Lee Han-ting is only using her as a shield for the family. After that, she goes into a rage, which leads to her tragic death. This supporting character played only the role of a catalyst in the love of the main characters. Therefore, the realization of her purpose in this story made the young girl sick. She was looking from the balcony at a young, attractive man who was holding a bouquet in his hands and calling her to come with him. No matter how much her heart forced her to agree, her mind restrained such impulsive decisions. The young girl could not even believe that this handsome young man who smiled so sweetly at her was the main character, the cold-blooded Lee Han-ting. He really wanted to find a wife as soon as possible to settle family problems. He planned to take Jian-mo Lee for this role in order to put her in danger. That young girl thought that this time she would not be swayed by his flattering speeches, so she asked if Mr. Lee was cold outside. The man replied that of course he was cold. Then the man smiled, looked at her with seductive eyes, and asked if she was really worried about him. But Jiang unexpectedly replied that she had the flu, so she would go home. The girl suggested that it is possible that she got sick with the flu, so she would not want to infect the young man as well. And finally, she asked him not to stand under the balcony because it scares her. The confused guy stood for a few more minutes, looking at how she slammed the door and went into the house. He could not believe that he was left alone on the street. The man didn't know what to think. And the first thing that came to his mind was that maybe Jian-mo Lee wants to marry Gu Xiuji, and that's why he doesn't want to go on a date with him today. Lee Han-ting was very angry and emotionally threw the bouquet to the ground. He quickly walked away from the house. At that moment, he thought that this was the reason for the girl's refusal. The girl saw how the angry man left, and therefore decided to take advantage of this opportunity and leave her house inconspicuously. Therefore, she quickly stepped down. She didn't have time to leave the yard when she ran into another young man, who smiled sweetly at her and said that he had booked a table in the restaurant, so they can go now. Jian looked into his eyes and somewhere in her mind cursed herself because she had already forgotten to think about this man. It was Gu Xiuji, the young master of the family who looked meek and gentle. In fact, he was a young man who had very serious problems with his head, and his pity was only the worthy heroine of the novel, who saved his life in his youth. His fiancée, Jiang-mo Lee, is just a toy, with whom he mercilessly played, and the fate of this toy is, of course, simply terrible, namely, a cruel death. At that moment, Jiang thought that when other heroines were reborn, they were surrounded by handsome and beautiful characters, and she was destined to start another life in hell itself. But before she had time to answer the young man, she heard the voice of Lee Han-ting, who shouted in displeasure that the young girl would go with him, because he had been waiting for her for a long time. But Gu Xiuji did not think of giving up and yielding this girl to an arrogant man. Therefore, he firmly said that Mo Li should decide for herself who exactly she would go with today. At that moment, Mo Li looked at these two young men and wondered what the difference was, and she would die anyway. They patiently waited for her decision. The young girl then decided that if she still couldn't escape death, she might as well beat the crap out of these two criminals before she ended her life. Therefore, she thought a little and said aloud that she did not even know what to do now, because she could not decide which of them she should choose. Here, Li Hanting couldn't stand it and painfully grabbed the young girl's hand. He shouted indignantly, asking the girl if she hadn't been following him all the time recently and begging him for a date. Jiang Moli was now finally convinced that he had been playing with her like a toy all along, and she blinked guiltily, saying that it was just a joke and that her words should not be taken seriously. Li Hanting stood and looked at the young girl, not believing his ears. He was so shocked that he could not utter a word, and he looked like a bucket of shit had been poured on him. Mo Li breathed a sigh of relief and thought she had dealt with one of her suitors. But before she had time to rest, a second young man immediately approached her. The young man gently hugged Jian Mo Li and flatteringly said that they should go to the restaurant because the order would not be waiting for them forever and they should hurry. Ta Jian Mo Li carefully released herself from the young man's embrace and moved away from the two of them. They kept their eyes on her while she solemnly sat down on the sofa opposite the men. Then, after a short pause, the young girl announced that there was no way in the world she would go to the restaurant with him, so she would have to decline his tempting offer for the time being. Jiang Mo Li later added that she didn't like any of the men standing before her, so she advised not to waste her time and go home. Gu Shuji. At first, he looked at her in such a way that it seemed as if he would kill her immediately, and then he smiled and asked if she could then tell him who she had fallen for. Li Hanting was not going to wait for her to think of an answer at all, and approached the shelter of the young girl. He placed his hands on the couch and leaned over Mo Li's face too close. She even regretted that she lied to them about some suitor, and there was no way back. Disgruntled, Li Hanting gritted his teeth for her to say the name immediately. Suddenly, a magical creature appeared in front of the young girl and asked the girl how their affairs were progressing. In her mind, she only had the answer that everything was bad. The creature was shocked by such an answer and pounced on the young girl with a lot of claims, because they had a corresponding task and they had to perform it according to a clear plan. The creature screamed that it was only worth it for her to distract herself for a few minutes, and she had already done such things here, which is not even on her head, because the killing power of the main characters just started to go off the scale. The animal began to cry and repeat that now everything is over, and if Mo Li dies, then he too will be put in solitary confinement. That girl tried to calm down the magical creature. Mo Li said that she would think of something, and began to think about how to get her out of this situation. She thought that very influential and powerful families were behind the men. They will easily get rid of her, because she came from a small family, and they definitely weren't going to take into account her interests. So the girl decided to name her suitor from a famous family. Mo Li decided that there were no better candidates for her lovers than the thief from this novel, Fu Yan Shen, especially since he was the head of the Fu family, as well as a cold-blooded and determined man. He became the head of the Fu family at a fairly young age. There were rumors that because of his poor health, he was brought up in one of the most remote Buddhist temples throughout his childhood. And when the boy became an adult, he forced his real father to become a famous and rich man. After a short period of time, everything happened. The young girl knew very well that in the novel, he was the main final boss, and the main inspiration of all the events that took place in it. The Fu family was the most powerful of all the famous families. Every day, the assistant told his boss that the next young girl reported pregnancy from him and counted them. The number of such messages was already 47. A large number of women who claimed to have an affair with this famous man. Everyone was so used to this that no one was particularly surprised by such a message. Therefore, the more the young girl thought about this idea, the more she liked it. Yi Jian Mo Li decided to announce that the name of the man she likes is Fu Yan Shen. Confronting almost fainted when he heard that name. He did not believe that this influential man liked the young girl and asked if it was really so. The young girl decided that it was better to lie while looking into the eyes of her interlocutor, so she smiled and replied that it was Fu Yanshen, who had said just recently that she was his favorite. Jian Moli was happy that she had come up with such a brilliant idea, and decided that anyway, this powerful man would never know what she had just said to these men here. But Li Hunting was not used to accepting defeat, so he took out his phone and found Mr. Shen's number. Looking into the young girl's eyes, the man silently handed her the phone. When the young girl read who exactly was signed under this phone number, she almost lost consciousness. Drops of cold sweat appeared on her forehead. The man watched her reaction, so he said that judging by the way she dressed up today, she should meet him. Therefore, he will call him immediately so that she does not burden herself. Li Han gritted his teeth that he shouldn't be thanked for this. And the young girl at that time cursed in her mind that now she would definitely get something from this cold-blooded tyrant. The magical creature, disgruntled, mumbled in Moli's ear that it was not necessary to deviate from the plot of the novel and insult the two main characters at once, and also involve the main thief in this story. The creature shouted that the girl wouldn't even have enough 9 lives to correct all the mistakes she managed to make on the very first day, and Moli promised to come up with something. After all, the young girl could not understand why she needed to follow the plot of this novel if she knew in advance that her final scene in it would be death. Meanwhile, the phone rang in the office of the CEO of Fu's most influential company. The man distracted himself from important documents and looked at the screen, wondering who could be calling him. The man picked up the phone and asked who was calling him, while Mo Li was trying to stay calm and greet Mr. Shen as calmly as possible, although her heart was actually racing. The young girl asked Fu Yanshen if he wanted to go on a date with her today. She was sure that such a thief had many mistresses, so he would not even understand who was calling him. The only thing she begged at that moment was for him to just go about his daily business and thereby play along with her in this game she invented. Fu Yanshen asked in surprise who was bothering him. Li Hanting was only waiting for such a good opportunity, so he snatched the phone from the young girl's hands and said with satisfaction that judging by the way Yanshen answered her, he was not going on a date with her. The young girl calmly replied to the angry man that it was just that Mr. Shen was embarrassed to talk to her on the phone like that, and trying to remain calm, she picked up a knife to peel the apples. But Jian Moli could not control her excitement, and the sharp knife slipped from her hands and she injured her right finger. Out of surprise and pain, she cried out loudly. A drop of blood dripped onto the bracelet that was on the young girl's hand, and from this, a bright light shone around the hand, but no one paid attention to it at the time. At this moment, in his office, Mr. Fu Yanshen, without hanging up, heard everything through his phone and was aware of all the events that were happening on the other side of the city. The man decided to disconnect from the telephone connection, and when he reached out with his right hand to press the button on the phone screen, he suddenly felt a pain in his right finger. Meanwhile, Gu Xiuji instantly ran up to the young girl and rapped her cut finger. He told her to be more careful with sharp objects in the future because he wouldn't always be around. Finally, the young man said that even if Jiang Mo Li was injured, the conversation about Fu Yanshen was not over, and they should put an end to this matter once and for all. At that moment, it occurred to the young girl that the man thought that she had injured herself specifically so that she would feel sorry for her and change the subject of the conversation. So she was even more disgusted by this. After all, since childhood, the young girl had a low pain threshold, and even in her thoughts, she could not allow herself to cause pain on purpose, because it was extremely difficult for her to endure it. And what seemed to others to be just an insignificant scratch, to Jiang Mo Li was just hellish pain, from which she could even lose consciousness. Then she thought that, of course, they didn't know, that she couldn't have done it on purpose. And then she caught herself thinking that her wound didn't hurt at all, and that was quite strange. Then she decided that it was just a privilege for the thieves who were tried to be killed, and that they did not suffer so much from the pain caused, then their pain threshold in the novel was significantly increased. While she was thinking about her injury and the threshold of pain in real life and the situation she was in, a man's voice sounded on the phone that was lying next to her on the table. It was only now that the young girl remembered that she hadn't finished her conversation with Mr. Fu Yan Shen when Li Han grabbed the phone from her and picked it up again. Shen asked if she was in pain, but the girl did not have time to answer this question, as he quickly asked which arm was hurting her. At that moment, Mo Li did not think about what she should answer, and answered that she was right. Immediately after her answer, Fu Yan Shen told the girl to dictate her address to him. But because of such an unexpected turn, the young girl was simply silent on the phone. Yan Shen then asked if she had already changed her mind about not going on a date with him, and asked again where he should pick her up. Fu Yan Shen immediately got up from the table and began to gather. He had never made such a spontaneous decision before, but some inner sense told him to do just that. The shocked girl dictated the address and disconnected. When she put the phone on the table, she just sat silently because of such unexpected events and did not know what to do next. The magical animal again began to rehearse loudly that she did not expect such a turn of the plot at all, and that it is beyond any limits for the main thief to go to the main thief. In the car, a confused Jiang Mo Li was sitting, who could not come to her senses from the latest events, because their consequences were so unpredictable that she herself did not know how it could all end. The girl could not believe that the main thief of the novel would personally come for her and take her on a date. Now she kept her eyes on him to make sure it was actually happening. That young girl caught herself thinking that dying next to such a handsome man like this man, who was sitting next to her, would not be a completely terrible end to this romance. And she was just getting a kick out of having those two fools around her finger. And now, they actually thought she was dating the richest and most powerful man in town. The only creature that was spoiling her mood at that moment was a magical cat, which was disgruntled all the time, drumming in her ear that you can't do that, and she should enjoy being alive for now. The magical creature was convinced that for such a lie, this man would 100% bury her alive somewhere in the dark forest, and no one would even know how her life ended. But Jiang Mo Li displeasedly growled at the creature to shut up, because today she had managed to have an extremely good day, and she was going to enjoy it as much as she wanted. Therefore, the girl decided not to continue the conversation with the magical creature and began to read the news on the phone about the nightlife of this city. And she was interested in the best restaurants, the richest men. Fu Yan Shen secretly observed the young girl and noticed that all the time since the beginning of their journey, she was constantly stuck on her phone. Then the man looked at the index finger of his right hand and remembered the last events that happened to him in his office. Fu Yan Shen noticed that his fingers still hurt. The young man asked Jiang Mo Li if she felt pain in her injured finger, which distracted her from an interesting article about recent world events. The young girl raised her right hand and showed her injured finger. She reported that it does not hurt her at all, although she perceives pain quite acutely from even the slightest scratches. Mo Li speculated that this might be due to the special composition of her body, but Fu Yan Shen had his own explanation for such an interesting phenomenon. To do this, he had to be sure of his assumption, so he took out a knife and injured his finger. From the hellish pain, the young girl almost lost consciousness and began to scream loudly at the whole car. Now he was convinced that his guesses were correct, and they were somehow related to this unfamiliar feeling of pain in their bodies. He had only one question in his head, among them. Who sent her, and what is she doing in his life, and most importantly, what other feelings connect them to each other, besides the feeling of pain? He didn't want to believe it, but guessed that their lives were also connected and unexpectedly asked the young girl if she liked him as a man. Jiang Mo Li decided to end their relationship and said that of course she admires him and understands that she belongs to a lower social status, so she will not bother him. The young girl said that she will always secretly watch him at a fairly large distance and not impose her communication on him, but only admire his good looks and intelligence. Yan Shen suddenly grabbed her hand and said that it is not necessary to do this at all, because the closer she will be to him, the better. It was then that Mo Li realized that she had specifically fallen. After a few minutes, the car stopped, and the young man said that she could get out. Mo Li saw that behind her was the luxurious estate of the Fu family. Fu Yan Shen said that while he would take care of his company's important business, she could live in his family estate. And about himself, he added that until he deals with her. As soon as the car drove away, Mo Li turned to the system and said that she thought the thief had simply broken down. And she added that her finger no longer hurts at all. The system replied, disgruntled, that it was not the thief who broke down, but that she broke down morally, so she needed time to rest and reboot. The girl was met by the manager of the estate and explained that except for the master's room on the second floor, she could visit whatever she wanted, and in case of which she could call him at any time. Mo Li smiled with satisfaction and asked the system if she liked this incredible house in which they found themselves. But the system replied that she does not want to communicate with the girl yet. Another magical being added that it was just the villa of the Fu family. But Mo Li objected, saying that it was a golden cage specially made for her so that the thief could get it. The young girl looked at every room of this huge estate with interest, and one room interested her the most. It read gaming room, and Mo Li clapped her hands in delight. But as soon as the door to the room opened, all the joy on Mo Li's face disappeared. Someone is using a gaming laptop in the room, and Jung Mo realized that there is another bird in this golden cage. The young man shouted into the microphone of his computer that all degenerates who cannot keep a point, and even a dumb dog, play better than them. Then there were only slurs and obscene language. Mo Li immediately noticed that this bird was quite aggressive and asked aloud how Fu Yan Shen could put an underage teenager in a cage. After that, the girl decided that Fu was a real monster. The system explained that this is not a bird at all and that the young man's name is Fu Jilin. In fact, this is Fu Yan Shen's own nephew who lives in his estate. In the novel, Fu Yan Shen was cold and heartless, but he was quite close to his brother and sister-in-law. He became a thief because the father of the main character killed them in cold blood. After that, the guardianship of the orphaned Fu Jilin was taken over by his own uncle, Yan Shen, and this boy was one of the few relatives that this cruel thief cared about. The system explained that as long as the young girl will please Jilin, she may not worry that the thief will kill her, and also added that now he is playing his favorite game, to which he devotes all his time. The guy just lost another round and she announced it loudly. The disgruntled young man returned and asked who the hell she was and why she had come to his game room, but Mo Li refused to let him guess who she was. The young man grumbled disgruntled that his uncle had many women in love with him, so he had to figure out how exactly she got here. Mo Li said that it was now clear that he was Fu Yan Shen's nephew since he called him his uncle. The guy pursed his lips and thought that this time the damn girl caught him. Mo Li remarked that it was cool that he was a gamer. Meanwhile, messages began to appear on the screen of his laptop as his teammates began to worry about who appeared in the presenter's room. The outraged young man turned to Mo Li and asked how she dares to comment on the way he plays, like she knows something about it. That young girl decided to play a little with the little one and, smiling, said that there is nothing complicated in games of the multiplayer online battle arena genre, and asked if he was a newcomer here. Here the little boy almost burst out of anger, and the comments of his gamers from the team appeared on the screen again, who began to make fun of the fact that the girlfriend of the best player of their team calls him a rookie. Fu Jilin decided to put this arrogant girl in her place once and for all, and offered her to play one game instead of him if she knew something about it, and allowed herself such comments. But Jung Mo Li did not think of backing down from her idea. She boldly approached the little one, took the headphones, and sat down behind his laptop. He even backed away from such audacity. The system again began to teach the girl and read morals to her about the fact that she should not contact other people, and if she continues in the same spirit, she will die today. 100 comments appeared on the screen again about who this stranger is, who will now join them in the team. Fu Jilin grumbled for her to turn off the comments and not worry about other players. The last comment particularly affected Mo Li. It was written that women cannot play in esports. She replied that men can only die in a couple of seconds and drain the rink. Mo Li then turned her attention to the little one and asked if he was saying anything because she couldn't hear him as she was texting with other gamers. He replied that he did not say anything special. Jilin pondered whether he would need to comfort her when she lost in the first seconds, because it was a complicated game in which he, as the master of the game, was also killed, so she had no chance. Jian confidently started the game. Meanwhile, the system didn't shut up, telling Mo Li that the kid is a game master of the highest class, and if he didn't have a chance to save the game, then what was she counting on? Fu Jilin kept his eyes on the progress of the game and realized in the first seconds that she was not a novice. After all, at first he was surprised by the double kill in her performance, then the quadro kill, and finally, the pentakill. After a couple of minutes, the word victory appeared on the screen, and the entire screen was filled with comments. How gamers simply admire this amazing girl who made this rink so cool. Drops of cold sweat appeared on the little boy's forehead. He didn't expect this fragile girl to be so good at games, so he shouted loudly, asking who the hell she was. John Mo Li explained with a smile on her face that she was Mr. Shen's lover, and he was so attached to her that he did not want to show their feelings, and therefore brought her to his estate. Fu Jilin had already heard these words hundreds of times from other women, so he didn't believe a single word she said. He knew that almost all the women in this town would love to be his influential uncle's mistress. Therefore, the boy grabbed her hand tightly and told her not to joke and to tell him the whole truth. Mo Li was taken aback by the surprise, because she did not expect Fu Jimin to be capable of such a thing. Meanwhile, the guy squeezed the young girl's hand tighter and tighter, hoping that she would split from the pain and tell him who she really was. Meanwhile, at the other end of the city, all the most influential shareholders gathered in the conference hall of Fu Corporation to resolve pressing issues in the company. Fu Yanshen suddenly felt his right arm begin to ache. He shifted his gaze to her and saw that she was lying relaxed on the table, and nothing was visually pressing on her. But the sensations were as if a hand was being squeezed harder and harder. Fu Yanshen then guessed that it was his recent acquaintance whom he had taken to his estate. He began to think about what could have happened to her in the protected house and came to the conclusion that she had been having some problems lately. His assistant noticed that the owner's mood had changed and asked him what the matter was or if he needed any help. Fu Yanshen said that everything is fine. When the pain began to increase, Shen could not stand it and abruptly got up from the table. The company's employees looked at their boss in surprise, because such impulsiveness was not characteristic of him at all. Suddenly, their leader said that the meeting was temporarily suspended and he had to leave for a while. Fu Yanshen immediately walked quickly to the exit. Fu Jilin began to get closer to the young girl and tried to find out who she really was, threatening her that he was getting impatient and listening to her nonsense. But Mo Li did not deviate from her version, and told that Mr. Shen brought her here because he fell deeply in love and constantly whispers all kinds of tenderness in her ears, telling her what a hot beauty she is. The phone, with which the child broadcasted his game online, fell to the floor, and the broadcast stopped. Immediately, messages from gamers who were waiting for the continuation began to appear on the screen. The door to the playroom opened, and a butler appeared on the threshold. He looked at the young men, who immediately stopped arguing and backed away from each other, as if caught in a hot schoolboy fight. The butler handed the phone to the young girl and said that they wanted to talk to Miss Jiang Mo Li urgently. She looked at the man in disbelief, but still picked up the phone. Jian Mo Li immediately recognized the man's voice that spoke to her on the phone. Meanwhile, Fu Jilin watched this girl and couldn't believe that his uncle had brought her to the estate himself. Immediately, she heard Fu Yanshen's annoyed voice on the phone, sternly asking her to take care of herself and not distract him from an important conference. The surprised girl hung up and asked the butler what the irritated Mr. Shen meant. The man smiled and suggested that perhaps he had advised her to go to bed earlier. The butler invited the young girl to follow him so that he would familiarize her with all the rooms that were in their estate, and that she would choose a bedroom that was convenient for her. Fu Jilin watched this whole scene and could not believe his eyes. More than one woman had not been so flatteringly escorted around their estate by the butler, and this alarmed the young man very much. But he wanted even more to know who the hell this young girl was, and why his uncle was paying so much attention to her, because it was nothing like Fu Yanshen. A young man was rereading the latest esports news and was just shocked that it was about a hot young beauty named Jiang who amazed everyone with her gaming skills. But reading such news about Mo Li was simply unbearable for him, so he got angry and threw the phone on the floor. The man shouted that this abomination was just mocking him. His subordinate watched his boss and did not know what to do, whether to calm him down or just leave the office. The irritated man adjusted his jacket and said he would show her some more. Having calmed down a little, the man ordered his subordinate to follow Jiang Mo Li 24 hours a day because he wanted to know everything about her, especially her whereabouts. At the Fu family's estate, in the living room, a young girl was giving orders as to where to put the shopping boxes that were brought in one by the delivery workers. Delivery workers whispered that they had never had to carry so many purchases in one day to any estate. Another said they were the richest family in the county, so it was business as usual for them. Meanwhile, the young girl just had time to give instructions on where exactly to put her shopping and was happy about the fact that today she just shopped perfectly. The system commented disapprovingly on the girl's actions, emphasizing that if Jian Changshan found out that she had spent his money on stupid purchases from the internet, he would have died immediately. Mo Li could not stop and stated that she had already spent 1 million for today, and then replied to the system that there was nothing wrong with it, because he always considered it only as a way to make money. And then the young girl added that if she hadn't fallen in love with the thief, her father wouldn't have given her a single yuan. At this time, Fu Yanshen returned home and witnessed this scene. He stood at the door and could not believe that the delivery service workers had already been bringing in the boxes with the purchases that his recent guest had made for an hour. While a surprised Fu Yanshen stood looking at the young girl, his nephew approached him. He also stood next to him and decided to find out about this stranger directly from his uncle. Fu Jilin told his uncle that he never thought he had such a strange taste in choosing women. He looked at the man and waited for him to tell him more about this girl, but the uncle was already in a completely spoiled mood due to the recent events related to this girl, so he quickly walked towards Mo Li without answering anything. Meanwhile, the young girl sat comfortably in the massage chair she had just unpacked, and, noticing that Mr. Shen had come closer, greeted her current roommate. Mr. Shen's mood was completely ruined, so he thought that sharing the feeling of pain was not the worst thing. The most important thing that bothered him was her interference in his personal space. He looked at the young girl, who was high from the massage, and asked himself what her real purpose was. At that time, she thought only that she had never had such a comfortable chair in her life. The young girl was distracted from her thoughts and turned her attention to Fu Yanshen, who was looking at her. She asked if he wanted to try sitting in that comfortable massage chair. While Fu pondered the answer, the young girl had already formed a picture in her head that he would rather sew her up, and she could finally start living peacefully as she wanted. He unexpectedly replied that he wanted to try. She didn't expect such an answer, and started to say that it was a pity that he wouldn't try. And then when it came to her, she looked at him in shock. The young man did not waste time, but came closer to the chair, and she had to give way to him. Fu Yanshen sat on it more comfortably, and she turned on the massage mode. The young girl watched the man sitting in her massage chair from the sidelines and couldn't believe that anyone but her was using it. A tense silence reigned in the room. After enjoying the massage for a bit, Fu Yanshen remarked that this chair was really comfortable and added that it was already quite late, so he would not delay Zen Mo Li, and she could go home. The girl asked what would happen to her chair and express delivery, and Fu Yanshen noted that his family would temporarily take care of her belongings and they could stay at his house. The young man smiled and told her not to worry about her things, and that they would remain in perfect order and integrity. He could guarantee her that. But Mo Lee only thought angrily that she wanted to sneeze at the integrity of her belongings. She wanted to go back to her vicious life, playing until the morning, drinking soda water and watching TV series. She wanted to convince him to kick her out of his life forever. So Mo Lee plucked up the courage to kneel by his leg and lean over his face quite close. Mo Lee seductively whispered that she didn't care if things remained intact. She was just very sorry that the time had come to part with Mr. Shen, and then quickly ran out of the room. He did not have time to say anything, and she had already slammed the door and went out into the corridor. Fu Yanshen silently looked after her and continued to sit in the massage chair in confusion. For a few more minutes, he could not recover from her such a daring act and touched his lip. It seemed to him that her lips were so close to his that he could even feel them now. The system rushed after the young girl and scolded her for such reckless actions. She was constantly worried that after that, she would definitely have to say goodbye to her life. But the young girl did not pay attention to the whining of the system and asked her how such a handsome man could be so cold. She was also impressed by her daring act. Then Zen Mo Lee generally plunged into some sexual fantasies and said in her voice that she hoped this handsome boy would behave quite loosely in bed. Mo Lee then added that she couldn't wait to see it and wouldn't mind seeing it for herself. The system was worried that she would soon be banned for such lustful thoughts. Her father met her at the door of the house. He impatiently asked Mo Lee if she had come back so late because Mr. Shen had delayed her. The girl saw that her father was happy with such a suitor. A young girl was sitting on the sofa in the room, who was also impatiently waiting for her half-sister. She asked how it was that Mr. Fu Yanshen personally came to her home. It was her stepmother's daughter, Jiang Han. She also added that Mo Lee needs to make the right choice, because otherwise she risks being left with nothing. But Mo Lee knew how to put this sassy girl in her place. She asked if she had done her homework, which school she was going to attend, what was her grade on the last exam. Han couldn't stand it and said that rich people like them don't need to pay attention to their studies. Mo Lee protested that if she failed the exams, she would sit here until old age. Putting her half-sister in her place, she turned to her father and asked him to give her 300,000 yuan for pocket money, because her money had already run out. Of course, the father could not refuse his daughter, because he hoped that she would be able to marry the richest man, and he would return all his invested funds to the last yuan. Meanwhile, Mo Lee's stepmother, Feng Wanyi, came into the living room and said that she had already prepared dinner and was inviting everyone to the dining room for a delicious meal. The system noted that, judging by the behavior of the young girl, it should have given her the role not of a secondary thief, but of the main provocateur of this novel. The girl replied that the baby does not need to worry about her, and the role of a thief is more than enough for her, and she will fight for her life by all possible means. The next morning, before the young girl had time to open her eyes, she was told that a young man had come to her. She hoped to see Mr. Shen at the door, so she hurried to the meeting. But Mr. Shen was not waiting for her in the living room. The young man smiled and greeted Zen Mo Lee, and she was surprised to ask how he got here. According to the original plot of the novel, it was on this day that Mo Lee was supposed to show true love to the hero, and his admirer was supposed to push her into the water, after which Mo Lee should fall ill. This is what will lead to the fact that the main characters will start their relationship, which will later develop into strong love. But the young girl did not want to do this at all. The system seemed to have read her thoughts and told her not to even think about ducking something and deviating from the main plot, because she would write a complaint about the girl to the head office of the penal system. Meanwhile, the father approached the young people and explained to Mo Lee that Gu Shiji had invited her on a date, so she should hurry to get ready so as not to delay the distinguished guest. The system threatened the young girl that if she refused, she would have to find a new heroine for this role, and Mo El, smiling, was forced to agree to such a proposal of her husband. Zhang Mo Li approached Gu Suji and asked if they were really going to have dinner together, and if so, she suggested going to the Favor Court restaurant. The young man said that he would fulfill any of her wishes and tenderly kissed her hand. At that moment, the young girl thought that it was very ugly and could hardly wait for him to let go of her hand. The system pounced again with complaints about the place that Mo Lee had suggested. After all, the main character worked in this restaurant, and according to the original plot, they were not supposed to see each other there. The system asked what Mo Lee was up to again. The girl replied that instead of them looking for Lee Han-ting, they should just let him come to them himself, and it would be easier for all the characters in this novel. While still a young girl, she planned to throw away the storyline with Gu Shuji from the novel, but the system told her not to even think about such a reckless act. This restaurant was one of the richest in G-City and was frequented only by high officials. Therefore, Mo Lee noted that it was worthy for the main character to do in such a prestigious restaurant. The young couple had taken the best seat by the window, and just as they sat down to look at the menu, they heard someone address the man in a feminine voice, calling Shuji's name. The main character of the novel, 7 Nights with the Wolf as a cute animal, Su Ming-shu, was heading towards them, and she kept her eyes on the young man sitting across from the unfamiliar beauty. Mo Lee gave the main character an appraising look and noted that she looked more like some kind of white rabbit who had not yet seen all the cruelty of this world. Meanwhile, the main character was holding the order pad and couldn't believe that Shuji liked young girls like the one sitting across from him. The young man also noticed that the main character looked at him in confusion and began to make excuses that he had nothing to do with this woman with whom he came here. Su Ming-shu questioned whether it was true and looked at him with such eyes that she wanted to hug her. He said that Miss Jian could confirm all his words. Mo Lee watched this cute affair and thought to herself that she really liked dramatic stories. Shuji looked at her like he was asking her to play along with him. Jung Mo Lee decided to play along with the young man today and assured Shu that there was nothing in common between them and that she had misunderstood everything. And then, with a smile on her face, she added that Gu Shuji just wanted to marry her. But she had not yet decided how to give an exact answer to such a tempting proposal. The man almost killed her with his looks, and she looked at him guiltily and said that he probably didn't want to talk about it, so that Sue wouldn't be jealous of him and she would say too much. When the waitress heard such news, she began to make excuses that they were not meeting Mr. Shuji at all, and did not know how to convey this message more believably. But Jian Mo Lee told the girl not to be nervous, because she didn't care at all whether Gu Shu liked her or not. In the end, he is still not to her taste. Mo Lee also asked if the waitress wanted her to leave them alone. And Sue, confused, said that she had to hurry, because she had a lot of orders, turned and ran away. The man wanted to stop Su Ming-shu, but did not dare to do so. Mo Lee told him that if he was worried about the waitress, he could follow her. She didn't mind at all. Gu Shuji decided to return to the table and explained to his companion that she was his bride, and she should not be jealous of any of the waitresses, because Mo Lee was more important to him. The man thought to himself that his mother likes this girl very much, and besides, she is Lee Han-ting's target, so he has no reason to let this young girl go. Shuji then suddenly said that Mr. Fu is different from everyone else because of his hot temper and can be easily provoked into rash actions and difficult to get rid of afterwards. Gu Shuji asked if Mo Lee knew what was happening to those women who admired Mr. Fu, and after a pause, he continued that one of them is still in a psychiatric hospital. The young girl even cried out in surprise and said that it was just some kind of horror. She also added that these are quite interesting stories about which she had no idea. Surprised, Gu Shuji looked at the young girl and asked if he heard her say that she was quite interested in it, because he did not expect such a reaction to his message. Mo Lee replied with a smile on her face that she was thinking about exactly how Mr. Fu would abuse her, whether he would put her on a chain and ask her, or just morally abuse her. Gu Shuji pretended to be amused by her witty joke as well, and said that the young girl has quite a lot of imagination. In the meantime, the system asked Zhang what it was producing. At this time, at the other end of the restaurant, an excited Su Ming-shu lost control of the dishes and spilled the dish on the rich customer's suit. He grabbed her hand and began to shout, "Does she know how much it is worth?" The young girl tried to get away from the man and explained that she did it completely unintentionally, and he had no right to touch her because she was only doing her job. But the man gloated and said that if she apologized in another way and made him happy, then he would forget about this incident and would not make a scandal. This did not suit Su Ming-shu at all, and she tried with all her might to escape from the greasy hands of this scumbag. But he squeezed her tighter and was already starting to touch her. Jianmo Li noticed that Shuji really wanted to help the waitress, but he didn't dare to do so while he was talking to her. Nevertheless, he did not take his eyes off what was happening in that place. Suddenly, the door to the restaurant opened and Li Hanting appeared on the threshold. He saw that a man was clinging to the waitress and shouted loudly, asking what was happening here in the old man's place. Jianmo Li also kept her eyes on this scene and, calmly savoring her food, said that this girl is really the main character because wherever she is, something is always happening around her. And then Mo Li turned to the system and asked why her baby was silent now. Disgruntled, the system grumbled that it was just waiting for the shameless liar to finish her task. Mo Li replied that the system should not panic and just enjoy watching this plot, because the girl became interested in watching it and promised that she would complete the task as soon as necessary. Meanwhile, Shuji couldn't stand it and also approached the waitress, and Zhang decided to watch this performance from the front row, so she also got up and went closer to the young people. Finally, these two main characters met their eyes, and on either side of them stood a confused waitress. They both had certain feelings for Su Ming-shu and did not want to back down from her. While they looked at each other, a spark even flew between them from such tension. The man with the ruined suit didn't even dare to come closer and decided to knock him down quietly. Also at this time, Jianmo Li approached them, and the waitress paid attention to her and said her name. Li Hanting turned his head in her direction and asked what she was doing here. Jianmo Li smiled because she just needed to be noticed and finally complete the task that the annoying system keeps pestering her with. Therefore, she immediately announced that she had come to see Mr. Gu Shuji, and she was very pleased that she got to meet Master Li, and it saved her from having to make another trip. Li Hanting looked at Mo Li and noticed that she had become very vulgar and blunt lately. He didn't know when it started, but since then, he even started to like it. So he smiled and asked what exactly she meant when she talked about the trip, and if she didn't have a grudge against him if she spoke in that tone. Mo Li replied that she was not offended at all, but just wanted to tell Mr. Gu Shuji that she was carefully considering his proposal of engagement. At that moment, Gu Shuji was very happy that the young girl had informed this man of his proposal, and smiling, hugged her and said that it was indeed true, and he was waiting for an answer. Ling Hanting's mood had already deteriorated, and he had already raised his voice to ask if she had come here just to announce the engagement, and asked if she loved Gu Shu. Mo Li just laughed in response, and asked how he could think of such a thing, because he himself should be aware that she likes him and is ready to do anything for him. There was such a tense pause between the young people that after the last words, no one could say anything, and everyone just looked at each other in silence. The system lit up that the task was completed because it was to inform the main character about her feelings. So the girl winked at the system and asked if she was satisfied. And since the task was completed, the satisfied girl turned 180 degrees and walked towards the exit. On the way, she reminded Mr. Gu not to forget to pay the bill. But she did not have time to reach the door when she felt that someone firmly grabbed her hand. When she turned her head, she saw that Li Hanting had caught up with her and angrily asked where she had gone. On the other hand, Gu Shuji ran up to her and said that he completely agreed with Hanting, and that there were too many unresolved issues between them that they needed to clear up today. Since childhood, Su Ming-shu was a very obedient girl, and because of this, adults often praised her for her behavior and set her as an example to other peers. The little girl was not only obedient, but also incredibly beautiful, and everyone wanted to be like this beauty. The elders told her to be just obedient and not think about anything. Soo Min-soo was always set as an example, and she grew up in complete harmony, for which she was very grateful to her parents and fate, which gave her such character and beauty. She was sure that everyone around her admired her because she was just a beautiful person, and that's why she was very proud of herself all the time. This continued until today, when for the first time she felt how two men who had previously shown some feelings for her began to completely ignore her and pay no attention to her. Soo Min-soo looked at Mo Lee intently and asked herself how this haughty, spoiled beauty was better than her, because she had always been an obedient girl since childhood, unlike Mo Lee. Jang Mo Lee caught Soo Min-soo's gaze and told the men that they could not leave here without solving some problem, and this problem was related to Mrs. Soo. When Soo Min-soo heard that the case concerned her, she started telling Mo Lee not to worry, and that she would try to earn the right amount of money to cover the damage of the damaged jacket. The man just smiled and said that it will be in a few centuries because his jacket is very expensive. Mo Lee waited for the reaction of the protagonists, but they looked at the waitress in silence. Then Mo Lee said that if men can't solve this problem, she can easily solve it herself. They circled around her and tried to decide which of them had more influence on the girl. Then the young girl quickly pulled her hand out of Lee Hunting's hands and walked over to the table where there was a bottle of red wine. She took the bottle and turned to the waitress. Mo Lee walked over to the man, who was smiling and waiting for the waitress to beg him and satisfy him not to make a fuss. Mo Lee came up and smacked the scumbag over the head with a bottle. Holding the broken bottle in her hand, the satisfied girl said that now she had soiled his suit, and therefore he should solve all further issues with her. And then, without thinking for a long time, she pointed her finger at Lee Han-ting and said that it is this young man who will cover all the losses, thus transferring all the responsibilities to him. Enraged, Lee Han-ting shouted at the man to get out of here immediately, and the man, without thinking for a long time, ran to the exit on the go, saying that he had no complaints against the master. Meanwhile, the waitress pondered why Jang Mo Lee had stood up for her, and why she had taken so much risk to get her out of this problem, while her suitor stood by silently. But Mo Lee didn't even think to stop, she said, looking into Lee Han-ting's eyes to make sure he didn't forget to pay for the bottle of this expensive red wine as well. He almost burst out of anger. Soo Min-soo started to say that this was too much, because Miss Mo Lee had already done too much for her today, because she was the one who soiled that man's clothes. But Mo Lee replied that she shouldn't be steamed, because she wasn't doing anything special, just taunting that man, trying to scare him a little. The waitress tried to explain that they were all human, and there was no need to treat that man like that, because it was very cruel, even for someone like him. Jang Mo Lee told her to stop making excuses for that bastard, because he was just going to take advantage of the situation and use Soo Min-soo for his lustful interests. Hearing this, Lee Han-ting approached the waitress and tried to ask her if the man really wanted to take advantage of the girl, and Soo replied that he had such intentions. Mo Lee came up to them and said that if he really felt sorry for Soo Min-soo, then he should just bow to the girl, because that is the best way to apologize. Lee Han-ting was not going to tolerate how Mo Lee constantly poked his nose into their relationship with the main character, so he painfully grabbed her hand and started yelling for her not to cross the allowed limits. Meanwhile, Mr. Fu Yan Shen was having dinner on the second floor of the same restaurant. His butler was always there and asked if everything was okay with him at tonight's dinner. No sooner had he raised the glass of wine to his mouth than he felt an unbearable pain in his right hand. Therefore, Fu Yan Shen replied that he was not satisfied with everything and abruptly got up from the table. At that time, the butler thought that his master was taking care of Mrs. Jang Mo Lee, so in reality he was not at all what he wanted to pretend to be. A second later, a man's voice rang out in the hall where Mo Lee and Han-ting were, telling Lee Han-ting to immediately let the young girl go. At such an unexpected order, Li actually let go of his hand. Surprised, Mo Li asked Fu Yanshen why he had come here. At that time, the man did not take his eyes off Li Hanting, because it was because of his actions that Yanshen's right hand still hurt. Fu Yanshen explained to the young lady that he had come here precisely because she could not be careful, as he had warned her and asked her not to get hurt. At that moment, Mo Li couldn't believe her ears, because it didn't look like a cold-blooded and ruthless thief at all, and she even worried that he had lost his tough character. Li Hanting couldn't take his eyes off this couple and asked why she didn't warn him about her relationship with this respectable gentleman. Meanwhile, Mo Li was examining the bruises on Fu Yanshen's arm. Li then thought that the young girl simply did not want to shame him in public, and he was even ashamed of it. He saw that there was some kind of fire in their eyes, so he did not want to disturb them. At that moment, Mo Li had a brilliant idea that this thief came just in time, and if she left the restaurant with him, then these two fools would not stop her. And then finally, the young girl will be able to get home and play her favorite game on the console, because these already love battles tired her out, and she just wanted to relax. The task remained for the little one, to persuade the thief to take her with him, so she looked at him with a gentle look and asked if he did not sometimes come for her to take her with him. She looked at him with such a pleading look that the cruel Fu Yanshen's heart melted, and he said that she could go with him. The young girl thanked him and took his hand. At that time, the waitress saw Zhang Mo Li leaving the restaurant and shouted for the lady to wait for her because she had something to tell her. Mo let out a doomed breath and said in a low voice that she highly doubted that this waitress would thank her now for all she had done for her. Therefore, the young girl asked Fu Yanshen to wait for her for a little while because she had something to say to this waitress at the end, and turning around, headed towards Su Mingxiu. Zhang Mo Li advised Su Mingxiu that instead of asking outside men to solve her problems, she should think in her head how to avoid them in the first place. The confused waitress just blinked her eyes and looked at the back of Mo Li, who was cheerfully leaving this restaurant hand in hand with the richest man in their district. Su Mingxiu was very impressed by her words. Su Mingxiu understood that she often got into various troubles, but there was always a man nearby who helped to solve them and pulled her out of any shit. But until today, no one had ever told her that this was bad, and after Mo Li's words, she thought about the fact that maybe she had set her priorities wrong in this life. Su Mingxiu asked aloud if she was bad, and suddenly Gu Shuji was next to her, who said that she is kind, intelligent, gentle, and there is no one better than her in the world. The young man also added that Mo Li is different from her, and she shouldn't be like that girl. He looked at her with such a gentle look that the waitress wanted to believe him. But Su Mingxiu was worried about how exactly she was different from Zhang Mo Li, and she asked Gu Shu about it. The young man just smiled and said that she didn't have to think about it at all. These words alarmed Su Mingxiu even more, because she no longer wanted to remain the same as she was until today. At that time, Li Hanting thought deeply about Mo Li's behavior. Previously, he considered her a vain nymphomaniac who was quite vulgar, and you could immediately understand who was in front of you. But now he couldn't read her true motives, because Zhang Mo Li didn't care about the opinions of others at all, and she did whatever she wanted. It made him wonder what was going on in her head even more. Li Hanting wanted to know Mo Li's true motives and what exactly made her change like this. So he made his way to the exit, deciding that he needed to think it over carefully. At that time, Mo Li and Fu Yanshen were walking along the street near the restaurant. They both walked in silence, and each of them thought about his own, because of course they had something to think about. The first to break the silence was a man who asked the young girl what she was thinking about. Fu Yanshen was curious to hear her answer, and he counted on her sincerity. She said that she thought hard and finally decided. These words interested the man, and he looked at her intently, wondering if she dared to tell him about their exchange of pain. That young girl started from afar and asked the man if such a gentle and attractive girl like her could endure pain. These words generally shocked the man, and he became curious about what would happen next. Mo Li then turned to Fu Yanshen and asked if there was anything else she could ask of such a respectable man like him. And she informed him that she had a very important conversation with him. Fu Yanshen asked if she could count on anything else, and the girl, smiling, explained that even such a powerful man cannot illegally keep other people's property. The man looked at her and asked what the speech was about, because he did not understand for the first time what this young girl was alluding to. And without thinking for a long time, she answered that she would really like to enjoy her massage chair, because she sat in it for only 10 minutes, and it was not at all what she expected. Fu Yanshen met her pleading look again, which he couldn't refuse, and said that she can get in the car. Mo Li jumped for joy and thanked Fu Yanshen. Finally, the young girl was sitting in her favorite massage chair, holding a berry shake in her hands, and enjoying an incomparable massage as if she were in heaven. Everything was just perfect. But the system flew up to her and began to murmur again that while she is enjoying herself here, she does not think at all about who will do the unfulfilled tasks for her. The system reminded that the young girl had to show her feelings for the main character, after which she should be pushed into the water, which would lead to love between the main characters. Then the disgruntled system flew up to the young girl's face and began to shout that because of her reckless actions, the whole plot went awry, and she was enjoying her massage here. But Mo Li did not want to worry about all these problems now and asked the system not to interfere with her high. Better yet, she advised her to follow the advice of the wise Lao Tzu. Surprised, the system asked what exactly the girl meant, and Mo Li quoted the wisdom. Who alone accepts both the beginning and the end? He is freed from failure in all matters. Then the system started going through the latest news and exclaimed in surprise that a very interesting article about a young girl had recently been published on the internet. Mo Li grabbed her phone from the system and began to carefully read what was written about her there. It was said that one of the restaurant's patrons said that all rich men simply lose their minds to Xian, but she was more interested in the incredible pile of comments under this article. Everyone began to wonder who this mysterious Miss Jiang was and whether she and Mo Li were really the same girl. Many people wrote that Mo Li cannot be this mysterious Miss Jiang, who was also during the online broadcast of the game. After all, she was known as the girl who fell for Li, and everyone knew her as a laughingstock. The system saw how the young girl's mood deteriorated, and she began to calm the young girl, telling her not to worry about all these dirty comments of envious people. But Mo Li just smiled and said that she is very curious how people on the internet can just insult someone they don't even know. The system asked if she was really offended by these comments. John Mo Li said that she was disgusted by what all these scribes were writing, and that's why she didn't pay any attention to it. Then she took out a mirror and noticed that no one had even written how beautiful she was. Then the young girl put down the mirrors and said out loud that she was the most beautiful girl in the world, and that's why they were just jealous. And she began to continue enjoying the massage. The system noted that from the very beginning, the thief was a real drama queen, and after today's incident, she was sure that this girl was not at all like in the story. Late at night, Fu Yanshen personally drove the young girl to her estate and dropped her off at the fence of the Zhang family's house. The young girl decided to thank her husband for today because she was still under the impression of an incredible massage. So she leaned into the car window and said that she was very grateful to him. Fu looked into the young girl's eyes and asked if she really expected a verbal thank you to be enough for all his concern for her. Mo Li smiled and said that of course she would like to pay him, but she doubted that such a rich man would need anything, so she could only express her gratitude verbally. But the unexpected man reached out his hand to her face and gently touched her cheek. He said that if she could not repay him financially, she could repay him in kind. The fact that Mo Li was shocked at that moment is an understatement. She did not count on such a turn of events, and therefore looked at her husband with wide-open eyes. Mo Li immediately began to search the system with her eyes and shouted, "What kind of thief has become not like herself, and what should she do now? Because she does not know how to behave now." The young girl decided to pull herself together and continue playing the role she had already started. So she whispered to her husband that if he didn't mind, she could thank him more than once. The driver in the car at that time tried not to listen to the conversation of the young people, so he even covered his ears. Mr. Fu Yanshen said they could go and ordered the driver to go home. The car suddenly moved from its place and drove away, gaining speed. The girl looked thoughtfully after the car and asked if Fu Yanshen was embarrassed after such intimate conversations. The system asked how it could happen that the thief overpowered the master thief. Jiang Moli herself did not understand how this happened, so she said out loud that maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Fu was driving in his car, trying to pretend that nothing had happened and remain calm, as his social position demanded of him, and his red ears said otherwise. Already in her room in the very first rink, Moli lost an important game because her thoughts were somewhere far away at that time. She threw the phone away because she really didn't like losing. She asked the system if it wasn't a highly developed artificial intelligence, and why did they lose in that case? Sistimu replied that she is a support for women, not help for Zadars. The system also reminded that it is time to play games, because tomorrow they have a very important event. According to the story, it was supposed to be Gu Shuji's mother's birthday, and she must be there. Since her engagement to Gu Shuji had been broken off, the young girl had to participate there as Li Hanting's companion, and the system reminded her of all the events that the girl had to perform clearly. First, Li Hanting will meet the main character by chance and take her to a far part of the garden away from the noisy guests at the banquet to talk about love alone. Left alone at the banquet, Moli was not feeling well due to illness and had to experience violence and humiliation from other supporting actresses at that time. Jian Moli doomfully asked why she must be humiliated or mocked wherever she appeared. The system replied that the answer is obvious. It is because of its role as cannon fodder. This day, X has come. All the guests got out of their cars near the luxurious estate of the Gu family. Among those invited were only the most influential aristocrats of the city. Jian Moli also got dressed nicely and got out of the car near the luxurious villa. A short black skirt successfully emphasized her graceful figure, which attracted the attention of almost all men. Only the dark circles around her beautiful eyes said that playing games all night was a bad idea before such an important event, and even cosmetics could not save this situation. The young girl did not have time to look at the beautiful estate when a blonde immediately ran up to her and took her hand. She began to address the girl by name and said that she could hardly wait for her. The blonde smiled gloatingly and said that judging by her relationship with Mr. Gu, the young girl must have prepared a very fancy gift for his mother and asked if she was right. Moli asked the system who this white-haired brat was, and the system explained that the girl's name was Chung Anchen and that they appeared to be best friends. But in fact, she was secretly competing with Jiang Moli. Chung asked why Moli was silent, and whether she was simply not ready to confess what she had prepared for her future mother-in-law. But Moli calmly replied that she had not even planned to prepare a gift. Surprised, Chung Anchen looked at Jiang and asked how she could possibly think of not preparing a gift for the person whose family she planned to become a member of soon. Moli explained that she tried to refuse, but Gu Suzi was so persistent in his decision to marry her that she ended up not knowing what to do. And then, looking into the eyes of her, so to speak, best friend, Jiang Moli said that lying about the real facts is not a worthy act for such a noble lady as Chung Anchen. Gu Suzi approached the girls, and Anchen decided to humiliate Jiang Moli in his eyes. So she loudly said that Moli couldn't be so arrogant even if Gu treated her well. Chung Ancheng also added that if Jiang Moli is counting on marrying Mr. Gu, then she can't treat his mother's birthday so lightly and not prepare a gift. Gu walked over to Moli and kissed her hand. She asked in a guilty voice if she was really wrong, and Gu smiled and said that the best gift for his mother is that she came here. Gu then said that he had to finish some preparations for Mom's birthday, and as soon as he was free, he would definitely find Mo Li. She waved her hand back at him. Anchen almost burst out of anger. She mentally cursed that the man had noticed nothing but Mo Lee's beauty. And Mo Lee at that time looked at her friend with a victorious look and thought that she was needed. Mo Lee then walked into the middle of the estate, saying that high society girls shouldn't smile at each other when they hide a knife behind their back, and if you hate it, you shouldn't fall over. The party was in full swing, and the guests began to taste the prepared, exquisite dishes and taste the elite drinks, which were delivered specially to order for Miss Gu's birthday. Mo Lee took a piece of the very appetizing cake and tasted it. Still, she did not regret her decision to come to this holiday, because the food here is really very tasty. Then the young girl heard some conversation between the two men. One of them asked the other who he thought he was. This really caught Mo Lee's attention, and she decided to come closer. She thought that such quarrels between rich boys were a bit more interesting than watching aristocrats cost different things, and Mo Lee went to where the fights were. One man told another that the illegitimate child dared to show his teeth to him, and for this, he would suffer a worthy punishment. Mo Lee began to look more closely at the men and decided that this was one of the main characters who had recently changed his hair and was now difficult to recognize. One of them told the other that he could deprive him not only of his position, but also of everything else. And if he pleased him, then the man would give him a chance to beg for pardon. Another man could not stand such an insult and grabbed his opponent by the jacket. The same calmly looked into his eyes and asked if he wanted to hit him sometimes. Mo Lee quickly told the system to tell everything it knew about these showdowns of the rich, and when the system asked what exactly the girl was interested in, Jung replied that she was interested in absolutely all gossip. The system revealed that Lee Han-ting was the eldest son in the Lee family from the beginning, but as soon as his mother died of a terminal illness, his father immediately brought his new love into the house. Since then, the father never bothered about little Lee Han-ting and gave all his attention only to his new wife and illegitimate son, completely turning his back on his eldest son. There were rumors that even though Lee Han-ting was the eldest son in the Lee family, and the heir would most likely be the illegitimate son of the head of the Lee family. So the system told all the latest gossip. When Mo Lee listened to the latest news, she even screamed because the fight was going on between the rich and the poor for the right to become an heir, and her voice was heard by the men who shouted who was hiding there. The young girl understood that she was noticed, so she had no other choice and had to go closer to the men. Jung Mo Lee came out from behind the flower and waved to the men present, smiling sweetly. The girl hoped that one smile would be enough to smooth out this awkward situation. Lee Han-ting, of course, recognized this young lady and asked how she found him. The girl was surprised that at that moment he thought that she could not be interested in anyone else here besides him. Therefore, Mo Lee decided to diffuse the situation and said in a cheerful tone that if they continued to decide to continue their showdowns, she would not interfere with them and would wait on the sidelines. The younger brother immediately smiled and asked if this beauty was an acquaintance of his older brother and if he would like to introduce them, because he would not refuse such an opportunity. Ta Lee Han-ting blocked his way and said that their joint business had nothing to do with this young lady, so he would advise not to touch her and stay as far away as possible. The younger brother just smiled ominously and thought that if this girl is so important to his older brother, he absolutely needs to take care of her and make him even more angry. Therefore, younger brother Lee approached Mo Lee and, extending his hand to her, said that she should not be afraid of their quarrels with the elder brother, and he was not against getting to know her better. But Mo Lee, without holding out her hand, said that she knew he was Lee's younger brother, about whom there are many rumors, and asked him not to be so flattering, because she was sick of him. From her words, the younger brother froze with his hand drawn, and did not know how to react to these words of a young girl. And Elder Lee almost burst out laughing, watching this picture. Lee Han-ting thought at that moment that he had made the right choice, and that Mo Lee could be the very shield that would protect him from the attacks of his younger brother, who wanted to remove him from power. But the younger Lee was not going to back down. He just smiled and said that the beauty misunderstood him, and that they would definitely talk later and figure out their relationship. Mo Li decided to take advantage of this pause and quietly go away because she was tired of all these conversations with men. Before she could turn around, someone called her. The young girl turned and asked what he needed because it was Li Han-ting who called her, who was quickly approaching John Mo Li. Li Han-ting approached the young girl and pinned her between him and the wall. He said that she liked him a lot, and so he decided to ask if that was really the case. The system immediately tensed up and reminded that Mo Li had an unfinished task. Then the girl answered that she loves him more than anything in the world and is ready to go into fire or water for his sake. Li Han-ting leaned even closer to the young girl and said that in this case she must definitely become his dance partner because after such an answer, he does not count on anything else. But Mo Li replied that she would not be able to campaign for him today, as she had come to this estate to the Gu family as a future daughter-in-law, and it would not be dignified to dance with anyone else. This completely stunned both brothers, and the younger of them asked how she could say that she likes his elder brother when she came here to get engaged to another. And then Jian Mo Li replied in a calm tone, telling Li Han-ting not to worry, because even if Gu Shu managed to get her body, her heart would always belong to Li Han-ting. She then ran her tongue over her plump lips and said, "Isn't it interesting when she is married to Mr. Gu Shuji, but still continues to court Li Han-ting?" Shocked, these guys looked at the young girl. The system also couldn't stand it and flew up to her, asking if she couldn't behave more discreetly, and Mo Li replied that she was trying as hard as she could. Then Jian Mo Li began to fantasize that the love of a crazy married woman must be very exciting, and she is even afraid to imagine what she would do when she had to play this role. The first thing she would do is tie Li Han-ting to the bed and blindfold him. His shirt would be all torn to pieces, and the marks of her passionate kisses would be visible on his elastic muscles. The system could not bear such erotic details, so it shouted that it had the strength to make Jian Mo Li immediately stop telling her dirty fantasies and shut her mouth. Fortunately, someone called the young girl, and she was forced to stop telling the details of her intimate life to the system, and the latter even breathed a sigh of relief. Jian Mo Li turned around to see Gu Shiji approaching her, accompanied by her mother and sister. The young man had a smile on his face and wanted to introduce these women. Jian Mo Li bowed to the dignified lady and greeted Mother Gu. The woman also smiled at the young girl in return and said that she was glad to see her in her estate. However, when Jian Mo Li met Gu Shu's sister's eyes, even goosebumps ran through her skin, because the young girl looked at her as if she wanted to kill her immediately. Mother Gu approached the young girl and gently took her hand. She said that you don't need to call her that officially, but you can just call her aunt, and complimented her on her beauty. The woman then took out a precious bracelet from her pocket and put it on Jian Mo Li's hand. She said it was a gift from her new aunt to remember them meeting. Mo Li sincerely thanked her aunt for such a precious gift and thought to herself that at first glance, Gu Shuji's mother seemed to her to be a kind and sincere woman. The same cannot be said about his sister. The still young girl glanced at Gu Shuji and wondered why the son of such a good-natured woman was so unlike her in character, because she knew what he really was like. The sister, who had watched her mother and her older brother's new girlfriend meet, immediately ran to Mo Li and hugged her. She said that she really liked the girl, and Gu's mother went to her sister and stroked her head. The woman said that she was very pleased that her daughter also liked Jiang Mo Li, so she hoped that they would be good friends. Mom said that guests were waiting for her, and she had to leave the young people because there were still many important things to do, and, saying goodbye to the girls, went to the other end of the hall. As soon as Gu's mother moved away from the girls, his sister immediately changed her expression, and she whispered ominously that Jiang Mo Li should not even think of marrying Gu Shuji. Jiang Mo Li could feel how treacherous this young girl was, so she turned away and simply decided to ignore these threats so as not to get into a conflict on the very first day of meeting the family. The system explained that this girl's name is Liu Qingqing, and she is Miss Gu's adopted daughter. Since the first days since she appeared in this estate, she has fallen in love with Gu Shuji, and therefore is jealous of him with everyone. Molly asked the system why there were so many villains in this novel. She no longer has time to deal with them all. The system explained that in each novel, there is a main villain and several minor ones. The system reported that the plot for today will be as follows. Molly will be locked in a room and will not be found until tomorrow morning. After that, her condition will deteriorate significantly, and the girl will have to be hospitalized. This message, of course, did not console the young girl very much, and she rolled her eyes under her forehead, saying how she was tired of following these stupid plots, because she just wanted to play games. At that time, Gu Shuji's sister thought that she had finally managed to intimidate the new suitor for her elder brother's wife, and decided that she was done for. Liu Qingqing S. put her hands on her chest and shouted loudly that she had seen many arrogant and shameless women like Mo Li, but they had all disappeared from their lives. Jiang Mo Li turned to Liu Qingqing and said that she was vain and she could admit it. So she wondered if Liu Qingqing could admit to herself that she was even more shameless than Mo Li. Mo Li advised Qingqing to close the door and keep quiet, because she is the biggest swindler in the Gu family than anyone else. Qingqing couldn't resist and started threatening Mo that she would arrange a sweet life for her. Liu quickly turned and ran away. Mo Li thought that she was a bad thief because she was afraid to even fight, so Jiang thought that Liu didn't have the courage to fight her. Meanwhile, a kind of tense silence reigned among the visitors and guests in the banquet hall. They all kept their eyes on the guest who had just entered and began to whisper what he was doing here. Mo Li herself became curious about what they paid so much attention to, so she came closer to see who caused such a stir among the guests of this holiday. But when the girl looked at the man who created a sensation, she herself was shocked because Fu Yan Shen entered the hall. He was simply unsurpassed in his new stylish suit. Even the system was surprised and noted that this character should not be here today according to the original plot. Jiang stared at the man with her mouth open and said that it was quite interesting. Here, her friend Cheng Anchen immediately appeared next to the surprised Jiang Mo Li, who asked if she had hoped to see such a high-ranking man at this event. Cheng Anchen looked into the young girl's eyes predatorily and said that she was curious to know if Fu Yanshen knew about the gossip that Jiang Mo Li had spread about him. Then this brat approached the young girl very closely and asked her if she had any idea what Fu Yanshen would do to her once he found out about all the rumors that were currently spreading. Then Jiang Mo Li smiled and looked into her friend's eyes. Mo Li said that of course she knew the answer to that question. Mr. Fu would tie her to the bed and satisfy her to death. Cheng Anchen replied that she was very wrong about the punishment that Fu Yanshen would choose for her, and most likely he would put her in a bag, tie her tightly, and throw her into the river to feed the crayfish. Then the young girl took out her phone and began to carefully search for something in it. Cheng Anchen asked what she was doing now and kept her eyes on the phone screen. Mo Li calmly replied that she is now buying her a present, and it will be the criminal law code, because her friend should deepen her knowledge in this field. So she decided to help her. Before Mo Li could make the purchase, 3 more beautiful young women approached the girls and said that they had been looking for Miss Cheng for a long time and were glad that they had finally found her. Also, one of the young girls smiled insincerely at Jiang Mo Li and said that she was glad to see her. Jiang immediately guessed that they had come here for a reason and was waiting to see what they would do next. Confused, Cheng Anchen was even surprised that these high society girls paid attention to her, because until today, they had always ignored the young girl and did not even greet her. Jiang Mo Li decided to test her guess and asked the system if these girls were also thieves. The system explained that the young girl, as usual, understood everything correctly. The girls took Mo Li's friend by the hand and said why should they waste time in such a stuffy hall, and offered to go together to the flower greenhouse and take Mrs. Jiang Mo Li with them. One of these girls came close to Jiang Mo Li and even took her in her arms. She said that Miss Cheng's friends and their friends were too, and suggested that they go to the greenhouse together. Cheng Anchen wanted to object and say that what kind of friend is she if they didn't even pay attention to her until today. She also suspected that there was something unclean here. One of the girls approached Chung, took her hand firmly, and looking into her eyes, asked if she was right and they were really friends. Here, Chung was not jokingly scared and did not know what to answer. Jung Mo Lee herself intervened in the situation, who smiled and said that it was quite a good idea and that they should all get some fresh air and a change of scenery in the cool flower greenhouse. So Jung Mo Lee suggested that they all go there together, and the girls walked towards the exit. At that time, Chung Anshin's heart was pounding hard because she felt some kind of danger. At that time, Fu Yan Shen kept his eyes on Mo Lee, who, accompanied by unknown girls, headed for the exit. The birthday girl asked the guest if anything had happened, and he replied that there was nothing special. When the girls entered the flower greenhouse, they noticed that there was also another young girl in it. And Mo Lee, of course, knew who was supposed to be here because she was already well acquainted with the plot. The girl who was waiting for them in the greenhouse said loudly that they had finally arrived, and one of the girlfriends locked the door in the greenhouse with a key, and all the girls noticed it. The girls immediately reported to the landlady that they had brought these girls, as she had ordered them to. And one of them looked at Xian and asked how she even thought of insulting this dear lady. Chung Anchung trembled in terror and thought that she knew how celebrities attacked ordinary people in groups and what horrors they did to them. But she did not think that she would find herself in this situation. One and her friend waved and shouted for Miss Chung to come to them, as they would need her help very much. She smiled so much that her sinister smile made her creepy. Frightened, Chung Anshin asked what they needed and reminded her that today is Miss Gu's birthday, so it's not a good idea to spoil the birthday girl's celebration on such a solemn day. That girl asked Chung Anshin if she knew who Miss Liu Qingqing was and explained that she was Mrs. Gu's favorite daughter, so anyone but her would be to blame for the ruined celebration. Frightened, Chung turned to Mo Lee and saw that the girl was watching something carefully. She asked what she was doing, and Mo Lee calmly replied that she was watching the ants crawling on the floor. Liu Qingqing heard this answer and shouted with all her heart that very soon this bastard Jiang will pay for all her deeds, and she will forever banish the idea of marrying her brother from her stupid head. Liu Qingqing then took the flower pot in her hands and said that it was her mother's favorite flower that was not sold in any flower shop, and asked if Mo Lee knew what would happen if it broke. Liu Qingqing added that her mother searched for him for a long time and barely found him abroad, so she values him very much. And then she smiled gloatingly and threw the pot on the floor, which fell and shattered into hundreds of pieces. Mo Lee looked at this haughty, rich woman and asked what she had to do with this broken pot, especially since she doesn't really like flowers and doesn't understand them at all. Liu Qingqing said that everything is not as simple as it seems at first glance. And her friends began to tell in one voice that they saw with their own eyes exactly how Jiang Mo Lee threw that pot. Liu Qingqing looked at Jiang Mo Lee with a triumphant look and asked how she understood such a turn of events, because everyone knows that history is written by the victors. Mo Lee said that of course she knew the saying and fully agreed with it. And then she asked if they knew what the red dot that glowed under the ceiling in this room meant. The young girl raised her finger and pointed her rich girlfriends at the surveillance camera that recorded their every move. And as soon as the girls realized this, they froze in shock. Liu Qingqing got angry at Mo Lee and waved her hand and shouted that she was the beloved daughter of the Gu family, and with a single snap of her fingers, all the CCTV footage would be erased. Liu Qingqing pounced on the young girl and shouted that today she will show what happens to those who stand in her way. But Mo Lee wasn't going to wait until she was spanked and grabbed Liu's hand tightly. Then, Jiang Mo Lee slapped Liu so hard that the confused Liu flew several meters away and fell to the floor. Liu did not expect that this girl would resist her. Therefore, sitting on the floor and holding her cheek, which hurt excruciatingly, Liu Qingqing asked how she even dared to raise a hand against a representative of the Gu family. But Jiang Mo Lee bravely replied that there was nothing in this world that she wouldn't dare to do, so she was lucky enough to be a little frightened. Liu shouted that the bastard who had raised her hand against her would soon regret it, because her brother Gu Shuji would never forgive his younger sister's insult, so they would see who would be the winner here. But before she had time to prove her threats, Mo Li slapped her once more, and approaching the frightened girl in the shelter, asked her if she really thought that any threats could stop her. Jian Mo Li looked at the girl sitting on the floor and said that until today, she had used so many ways to frame her and asked where is her arrogant smile now. Mo Li also asked if she is now proud of her actions and if she regrets any of them. And then she said that this game can be played together and took another pot with flowers in her hands. Without thinking long, Zhang Mo Li swung that pot and flipped it onto Liu Qingqing's head. Earth poured out of it onto her new makeup and expensive dress, and she sat there with a bucket on her head. Then Zhang looked around the room and fixed her gaze on the three friends who had brought her here and sternly asked why they were so silent. They huddled together like sheep and trembled with fear. They started knocking on the door and asking why it was closed. Someone sent a servant for the key. The girls inside heard these conversations, and Liu Qingqing screamed in fright that this was not enough. Ta Mo Li came to her and hugged her and put her finger to her lips. Mo Li asked her not to open her mouth because she didn't want Miss Gu to know that her daughter was sitting here covered in mud. Frightened, Liu Qingqing didn't know what to do, so she quietly asked Zhang Mo Li what else she had planned. The only wish was that she would be released as soon as possible and stop abusing her. Zhen Mo Li smiled and said that this was a very apt question. Then she went to the other end of the door in the conservatory and opened it wide, letting in the cold air from the street. Mo Li held the door open and said that instead of making Miss Liu Qingqing a laughingstock, she should take the initiative into her own hands and accept some sacrifices for her own good. Liu Qingqing got up from the floor and, shivering from the cold, shouted that they would definitely meet again and she would avenge her insult. Her sad girlfriends also approached their mistress. And then, with all their spirit, they all ran out of the greenhouse together, worrying that Mo Li wouldn't give them another couple of slaps at the end. Mo Li just calmly told them to be careful and not catch a cold. Cheng Anchen was simply delighted at how skillfully the young girl was put in the place of these haughty aristocrats and watched with open mouth all the showdowns. Cheng approached Mo Li and asked if she was afraid that she would not be accepted into the Gu family after this. And Xian replied that what kind of old man should she be afraid of if they were already plotting something against her? Finally, Zhang told her friend that if she wanted to keep her so-called friendship with these aristocrats, she should be ready to please them all the time and forget about her own dignity. Shocked, Cheng Anchen watched as her friend walked proudly out of the greenhouse and shouted that she would go with her, since neither of them currently had any girlfriends anyway. At this time, the men finally managed to open the door and entered the greenhouse. Fu Yanshen was the first to enter, and he looked around the room, looking for Jian Mo Li with his eyes. When he found her, he immediately approached her, and the surprised girl asked what he was doing here, because she did not expect that the first person to come after her would be this cold-blooded aristocrat. But the young man silently looked at her with his fixed gaze. At that moment, she even felt a little uneasy about it, and a kind of tense silence reigned between them. Fu Yanshen noticed that the girl was shivering from the cold, and without thinking, he took off his jacket. All the guests present held their breath and watched as he gently put it on the young girl. As soon as the jacket was on Zhang Mo Li's shoulders, she immediately felt warmer, but not only because the cold did not reach her, but somehow inside, she continued to look into his eyes. Jian Mo Li barely managed to say his name, and he gently told her not to catch a cold, and mentally added that in that case, he would be the one to suffer from her illness. Fu Yanshen then noticed traces of dirt on her cheek, and his hand involuntarily reached out to wipe it. While he was trying to wipe her cheek, she managed to turn a good red. At that moment, her friend showed Mo Li a class sign with her hands and said that Fu Yanshen was much better than Gu Shuji, so Mo Li should not miss such a chance and mess with him. Everyone present could not believe that such a cold-blooded and cruel man like Fu Yanshen was capable of such tenderness towards a girl who was not from a rich family. Later, all the guests noticed that a broken pot with Miss Gu's favorite flower was lying on the floor. Everyone was surprised and amazed because they knew how carefully she treated him. Jung Mo-lee noticed that everyone was interested in the broken flower and explained that Miss Liu had accidentally broken the pot and was afraid that Miss Gu would punish her, so she had to run away. Shocked, Miss Gu looked at the young girl and couldn't believe what she said. Therefore, she questioned aloud whether Mo-lee was really sure that Qing King had done it. Fu Yanshen noticed that the birthday girl did not want to believe these words, so he told Mo-lee to leave and he would solve all the problems himself. Mo-lee was very happy with such suggestions. At that moment, when the man took his hand away from the young girl's cheek, he caught himself thinking that he constantly wanted to touch her, which he had never noticed before. Before leaving, the young girl turned around and saw that a fight had begun between the birthday girl and the guests. Mother Gu said to bring Qin Qin to her immediately. Fu also came closer to them. At that moment, Jung Mo-lee thought that this was the third time that a cold-blooded and cruel thief had reached out to her, something that was completely absent from the original plot. And then the young girl came to the conclusion that it was all because of her incredible beauty, and she said out loud that life is much easier for the beautiful in this world, and you should take advantage of it. She did not have time to leave the yard when Chung Anshin caught up with her and shouted to her friend to wait for her. This was not part of Mo-lee's plans, because she already wanted to get home as soon as possible. Chung bombarded the young girl with questions. How did she meet Fu Yanshen? And was it true that Lia Hanting and Gu Shuji were also competing for her attention, and even compared Mo-lee to the heroine of a novel? John Mo-lee forcibly untied herself from her fastidious girlfriend and, on her way home, asked the system whether they had managed the plot for today. The system replied that Mo-lee had corrupted it as much as she could. The system said that according to today's task, she was supposed to be mocked and locked in the greenhouse until morning, which would make her very sick. But nothing happened. Jian Mo-lee began to object and explain that Liu and her friends not only mocked her and tried to frame her anyway, and the fact that Mo-lee gave them a pass is a completely different matter. The system asked what the girl would say about the fact that she had to freeze in the greenhouse. Mo-lee began to tell that it was so cold there that she even had to use a jacket. The system told the girl not to speak anyway. She's doing everything wrong, and if she continues like this, the main system will soon be interested in her because she no longer has the strength to cope with Mo-lee. Mo-lee asked what the other main system was and what it imagined it to be. The system disappeared in an instant, finally telling her to forget those words, because Jung Mo-lee would know about the main system when the time came. The next morning, Jung Mo-lee woke up to the phone ringing. She picked up the receiver while still sleepy and hoped to hear the voice of one of her suitors. But her hopes were not fulfilled, and a man's voice shouted into the phone, asking her where she was going and why she was late for work, because she was supposed to be there 10 minutes ago. The young girl looked at the system and asked if she heard correctly that she had to go to work, because she thought that the villain of the novel should not waste her time at work. The system explained that, of course, all the heroines of the novel have to work and go to work, and there is nothing strange about that, so she should pack up and hurry to the office. A man's voice screamed into the receiver, warning the young girl that if she did not come to work today, the boss would deprive her of her monthly salary and might even throw her out the door. Mo-lee quickly jumped off the bed and ran to get dressed on the go. She shouted to the system that a working person is the happiest person in the world, and the system is only doomed to say that Mo-lee is not permanent. According to the plot, Mo-lee worked in a small advertising agency whose field of activity was the organization of events and the decoration of premises during their holding. The girl was not fired only because her commissions were often quite good, even if at other times she allowed herself to tinker with tasks. A young girl, full of enthusiasm, ran along the corridor, and when she entered the boss's office, she asked why he called her. Mr. Wu was already seething with anger and shouted, asking where her plan was. Jian Mo-lee immediately replied that she had almost finished it. but she would need a couple more days to get it in perfect shape, so she asked him to postpone it by 2 days. The young girl thought to herself that she had no idea what kind of plan was being asked of her, and within 2 days, she would definitely figure it out and do it perfectly. But the boss came closer to the young girl and asked, "What the hell, 2 days?" After all, the wedding is tomorrow, and they have absolutely no time left, and Jiang Mo Li should have submitted the plan yesterday. Jiang Mo Li returned to the system and asked how the wedding could be tomorrow, and there was no plan yet. Then she wondered if this company was really reliable enough. The system explained to the girl that the main system detected a low level of completion of the plot, and therefore decided to impose a penalty on Xin Mo Li for such careless completion of the task. Mo Li blinked and looked at the system again, wondering what the hell punishment was in store for her. The system smiled and said, "If the girl has not understood yet, then the punishment has already begun." Suddenly, the young girl's phone rang. She shuddered in surprise and looked at the phone screen. Fu Yanshen called her, and she didn't know how to answer him in front of the boss. The boss calmly looked at the young girl and saw that she was excited about the phone call, so he said that Jiang could answer. He would wait for her to finish the conversation. As soon as the young girl picked up the phone, she immediately addressed her interlocutor by name and asked Fu Yanshen why he was calling her. When the boss heard who was calling her, his eyes flashed. Fu Yanshen asked where the girl was, and when she explained that she had come to work at the office, he told her not to go out and to wait for him. While a surprised Mo Li was hanging up, her boss came up to her and asked which Mr. Fu he was talking about. And the young girl said that Fu Yanshen called her. As soon as the boss heard who it was about, he was so happy that he even offered the young girl to sit on a chair and discuss all the details of the visit of this respectable man. But before the young girl had time to sit down, there was a loud knock on the door, and a moment later, the boss's assistant burst in, who reported that some man was looking for a man in the entire office of Miss Mo Li. My boss immediately changed his face and gently said that he and Miss Jiang Mo Li already had to meet such an honored guest, so there was no point in sitting around for so long. The system asked why her boss changed immediately, and Jiang Mo Li explained to her that if you want to live, you have to be able to spin, and the boss wants to make a lot of money from this man. The girl walked quickly down the corridor, but the first thing she saw was a lot of bouquets of red roses, which were placed on the floor, and with such a number, you couldn't even see the passage. But when she looked up, she saw that instead of Fu Yanshen, Li Han-ting was waiting for her with a bouquet of roses in his hands, who said that it didn't matter if she was engaged or single, he still wanted to be with her. The man smiled and held out a bouquet of flowers. Li Han-ting also added that he would be happy to see her at dinner at his house today, and everything is ready for that. The young girl rolled her eyes and told the system that now she would die of boredom. The system explained that this behavior for the main character is quite normal. The boss of the company immediately ran to the man and began to tell how happy he was to meet Mr. Fu Yanshen and admire his talent and ability to conduct business affairs in business. As soon as Li Han-ting heard who the head of the office had confused him with, he almost burst out in anger. Jiang Mo Li also noticed this, so she approached her boss and cautiously said that it was not Yan Shen at all. Displeased, Li Han-ting said that he had confused him with someone and gave his real name. And then he looked at the young girl in such a way that he was ready to kill her. The boss immediately smiled and said that of course he didn't recognize him because he was preoccupied with current affairs, and added that he was glad to meet a representative of such a famous Li family. Li Han-ting approached Jiang Mo Li and asked in a stern voice if Fu Yanshen really had to come here. The young girl pointed to the exit and said that he had already arrived. A handsome man in an expensive suit was standing at the door, looking at all the bouquets of red roses that stood on the floor around the young girl. The young girl waved Fu Yanshen and said that she was glad that they had met so soon, because they had only seen each other yesterday, and she did not expect to meet him again today. Fu Yanshen bowed his head and said that indeed they had not seen each other for a long time, but he had important reasons for their urgent meeting, so he came to her office. Li Hunting watched as the young girl chatted with Fu Yanshen and was angry that she had never smiled as sweetly at him as she did at this rich, handsome man. The man asked why the young girl does not come closer to him to say hello, but communicates with him at such a great distance. Mo Li looked at the floor and said that it was because of these incredibly beautiful bouquets blocking her path that she could not approach him. The man's eyes also surveyed all this flowery beauty. Li Hunting was happy about the fact that he managed to surprise all the office workers with his flowers and thought that any girl would not refuse such romance. And then he looked at the rich Fu Yanshen, who came empty-handed, and mentally noted that in this round he beat him with a score of 1-0. Li Hunting said that he brought all these incredible bouquets for the girl to make her smile, and if she liked them, Jian Mo Li would receive them every day. Mo Li did not miss such an opportunity and approached her boss and asked if he would like her to sell these flowers to the company at a discount to make up for missing the plan's deadlines. Li Hunting resented the young girl, but did not show it. Mo Li asked if he would take all those bouquets back, and the man replied that he never takes his gifts back. After that, the office workers began to arrange flowers in different places, and finally, there was a free place on the floor. Fu Yansheng took advantage of this and approached the young girl. As soon as Fu Yanshen got close enough to her, he immediately asked if she was feeling well and if everything was okay with her. Jiang Mo Li was surprised by such a question. Then she analyzed all their last meetings and came to the conclusion that he immediately came to her as soon as she felt any pain, or rather, he felt it for her. But today was surprisingly ordinary, and no one caused any pain to the young girl. Therefore, she wondered what had scared Fu Yanshen so much that he had come to her urgently. Mo Li then decided to ask the system if it was because Fu also had a system, and that was why he came to her. The system explained that this is impossible because two systems do not appear in the same world. The young girl decided to find out the reason for his arrival herself and invited Mr. Fu Yanshen to come to her office and talk about everything in private. Li Hunting asked why she invited Fu Yanshen to her office in particular and remarked that she was not one of those bad girls who had to change men like gloves. All the office workers kept their eyes on the young people who couldn't share the girl and noted that the love drama between the rich is so interesting that you can't take your eyes off it. Jian Mo Li explained that Fu Yanshen had come to their office to discuss some work matters, and as it was working hours now, she should pay attention to their business partners. Li Hunting smiled and thought that this was the biggest lie he had heard from the girl's mouth, because he would never believe that such a rich man could cooperate with such a worthless company. Li Hunting then approached the girl and said that the Li Corporation's anniversary is coming soon, and they want to have a party for it. So he has to discuss some work points with her. Mo Li smiled and said that this is a very good choice, because it is their company that specializes in these matters, but such a small employee as her cannot handle such an order. The young girl quickly pushed her boss to Li Hunting and said that such a large order should be handled personally by the boss of the company, and that is why he will discuss all the details with him. The boss approached the young man and said that he was glad that Li Hunting's choice had stopped at their campaign and offered to review the latest orders. As soon as Li Hunting saw that the young girl with the rich man shut herself in her office, he turned around and left. The boss asked where he was going, and Li explained that he would send someone to discuss everything. An angry Li Hunting was pacing down the hall and thought that his family had recently proposed to him to marry Mo Li, and everything was going well. But now this scumbag stood in his way. The workers immediately began to gossip that they had no idea that the girl from their campaign belonged to a very influential family if such rich people revolved around her. The two girls were discussing the latest news, and one of them said that she had read an article somewhere that not only Li Hunting was in love with Jiang, but also Mr. Shen, and their whole town was already gossiping about it. The girls began to wash the bones of their employee and sketched ideas about what they were doing in her office with the rich man who had just arrived at her place. The boss immediately returned the girls from heaven to earth and said that there was quite a lot of work waiting for them, so they should all go to their offices and continue working. Jianmo specifically closed the door of the study so that she could be closer to Fu Yanshen and accidentally touch his body with her breast. She froze in such an intimate position. The system began to rehearse so that the young girl would come to her senses, because she is currently in the company's conference room and anyone can enter here at any minute. But Jianmo replied that this thief was so perfect that he was so attracted to her, and the young girl could not do anything about it. That's why all her animal instincts are off the charts. Jianmo then began to tell the system that she could knock this handsome man down on the table and passionately kiss him while he looked into her eyes, and then untie his tie and expose his body. The system told the girl to stop telling her erotic fantasies, and she goes into standby mode for now. Meanwhile, Jianmo asked Shen in a sexy voice why he had come. The man asked what exactly she wanted to hear. And then Jianmo ran her hand over his cheek and said that she thinks he wants more than just sex from her, and that he always finds himself next to someone who hurts her. Only now did Fu Yanshen realize that the young girl had no idea that they had exchanged feelings of pain, and this was a real revelation to him. Therefore, Fu Yanshen decided to play with the beauty and hugged her tighter, pulling her closer to him. She did not expect such bravery from him, so she held her breath. Yanshen asked why she thought he was not only interested in sex, because she was very pretty, and when he saw the girl, he decided to put her in his golden cage and asked her what she didn't like. The young man leaned closer and closer to the young girl's face and asked if perhaps she would like a diamond cage, or jade, or silver instead of gold. At this moment, Jianmo was no longer joking, and she mentally asked him to stop immediately, because he is just a thief in this novel, not some pervert. Therefore, the young girl pretended that it was just a joke and started to walk away from Fu Yanshen, saying that he was still the same prankster, and his jokes were simply second to none. Fu Yanshen then looked into the young girl's eyes with a look that made Jianmo Li's skin crawl. The man also asked where she got the idea that he was joking now. Then the young man still told Jianmo Li why he has been treating her like this lately, and said in a low voice that now he will show her the reason for her doubts. The man raised his finger to the table, swung, and gently hit the table with his hand. Of course, he didn't feel anything at that time, so he turned and looked at the young girl's reaction. She, on the other hand, was rehearsing in pain to the entire office, holding her finger up and not realizing how it happened that it hurt her finger so badly for one reason or another. Jianmo began to analyze why he hit her, and it hurt her. And only then it occurred to her that maybe they had exchanged feelings of pain, and she still decided to check it one more time. Therefore, the young girl hid her hand behind her back and painfully pinched her leg. Although she did not feel pain at that time either, she closely watched the young man's reaction. After standing in silence for several minutes, the young man said that it was enough to pinch himself, because he already had enough, and she could stop testing their feelings with pain. After that, the young girl was finally convinced that she and this young man, by some miracle, had exchanged the feeling of pain, and now his attention to her became clear. Now everything fell into place, and she began to remember all the times when she hurt herself or someone hurt her, and she felt nothing. At that time, it was this man who felt everything for her. Then the young girl came up to him and asked if he knew how to fix all this, because she would like to help him in this, so that they would not be so connected to each other. The man said that it was just a test, and as soon as she had trouble, she should definitely inform him so that he would help her with all the solutions in time. At that moment, she thought that it would be a good opportunity to get a partner like this main plot thief, because she had only dreamed about it from the very beginning. The man said he had to go, and finally added that if she couldn't take care of herself, he could place her with him and see to her safe stay. As soon as the door closed behind Fu Yanshen, Jianmo immediately told her little one to get out, because nothing inappropriate was happening here. When the system appeared in front of the young girl, she asked why they managed so quickly, because only a few minutes had passed, and she expected that their passion would last longer. When the system flew closer to the young girl, it saw that her eyes were red. So worried, the system asked Jian Mo Li what happened here and why she was crying now. The system said how could that brat just take it and walk away? And the young girl explained, wiping her tears, that he simply has too much work and therefore he cannot spend much time on her. But the system tried to calm the girl down and shouted that Xian was not even going to enter his position because if he really wanted to, he would find a moment of free time. Then the girl began to smile and told the system that it was very nice of her to care for her so much. The system was offended and said that it would no longer work on her acting. Jian Mo Li asked the system if she really thought that they would engage in obscenity here. She didn't like these jabs at the system and told Mo Li to shut up. Diazan said that now it is clear why the system included the standby mode. It is not clear why for up to 7 hours. And the system explained that it made such calculations based on the thief's physical condition. Then the young girl thought about it herself, but said out loud that making such hasty conclusions, judging only from the appearance, is a rather hasty decision. And at the same time, she blushed. Already in the evening after the working day, the young girl hurried home. But when she went outside, she saw that a young man was waiting for her, and she already guessed who it was. As she got closer, Li Hanting asked if she could finally give him some time, since he had been waiting all day for her to be free from her work duties. Jiang Mo Li smiled sweetly and told the system that most men behave like real jerks when it comes to women, and she observed this regularity quite often. The system asked what she meant. Mo Li explained that when she was running after Han Ting, he didn't even look in her direction. But as soon as another male appeared on the horizon, he was right there. And then the girl looked at Li Han Ting and said that he will always come first for her, so she would be happy to take a moment for him and come to his aid at any time. Li Han Ting breathed a sigh of relief and even smiled. He said that he thought the young girl did not want to see him, but her answer pleased him and gave him at least some hope. Jian Mo Li explained that earning money was a pleasure, and Mr. Shen paid her a very good fee for another order, so she could not refuse him a personal meeting. The system asked with a frown if the thief had given her any deposit while she was away at their private meeting. The girl replied that she fantasized a little to support the conversation. The man worriedly asked if she needed money, and didn't she make enough profit when she resold all his bouquets in her company. The young girl spread her hands and explained that such elegant gifts are very rare, and she needs money every day, which is why she is forced to work so hard. At that moment, the young man thought. Of course he knew that Mo Li belonged to a not-so-rich family, but he didn't think that she needed to work so hard to maintain her status. Approaching the young girl, Li Han Ting took her gently by the shoulders and asked how much money Mr. Shen gave her for the order, because he can pay her more so that she doesn't get so busy at work. These were, of course, applications from which she was actually shocked, because she could not recognize the cruel protagonist from the original story in this nice man. And as soon as she began to mentally estimate the amount she needed, the system reminded Mo Li not to even think of naming the amount, because her character loved this man very much and could not ask for money. Then the young girl was confused and less, that in fact a girl who is very much in love with a man would never allow herself to ask him for money, so it would look quite suspicious. And the girl decided to behave as the plot of the novel demanded of her, so she told out loud that he should not even think of offering her money, because he would simply insult her with this. This concession of the young girl greatly impressed Li Han Ting, and he even thought about how dignified she was in refusing his money despite her difficult financial situation. Then the man said that he would not complicate her life with such proposals. Meanwhile, Jian Mo Li mentally noted that she would certainly not refuse such complications. Li Han Ting then cheerfully announced that his family would very much like to meet her at dinner and asked how she felt about such an offer. While Jian Mo Li was thinking about what to answer, the system reminded her that if she refused, all events would go wrong again, and this time the main system would punish her more severely than last time. Mo Li knew why she didn't feel that punishment, because last time it was Mr. Shen who took the punishment instead of her, and this time, John Mo Lee didn't want him to suffer again. Out loud, the young girl cheerfully said that she had not yet met the Lee family, so this would be a very good opportunity to meet such respectable people. Li Han-ting did not want to put the case in a long drawer, so he immediately opened the car door and invited the girl to get inside. After only a couple of minutes, they were sitting in the living room of the Lee family. There was a kind of tense silence at the dinner table, and the girl noted that she had guessed that it would be exactly like this. Therefore, she prepared and waited for some reason from his parents. This tense silence was decided to be the first to be broken by a young girl who smiled sweetly and greeted Mr. and Mrs. Lee, saying that her name was Jiang Mo Lee. At that moment, Mrs. Lee wondered if this young girl was worthy of becoming a part of their respected Lee family, and what kind of Cinderella was sitting in front of them who dreamed of becoming a princess. Then the woman thought that if her adopted son were to marry her, her family would not be able to support him financially, and in that case, it would be difficult for him to get back on his feet. So she let out a cute smile and said that she was pleased to meet the young lady who had finally captured their Li Han-ting's heart, and he brought her to meet. The young girl's smile sent chills down her spine. She also smiled back and thought to herself that she had never seen such an insincere smile. Mrs. Lee then asked Mo Lee if she had considered marrying Han Ting, and added that if she were in the Zhang family's place, she would give her all the wealth they currently had as a dowry. Of course, such a statement stung the young girl, but she decided not to pay attention to it. The system said that since the beginning of their meeting, Miss Lee has been trying to humiliate her. In the original plot, after such humiliations, the main characters still continued to try to please stepmother Lee to please her and received even more humiliations in return. The system said that the Lai family always wanted to marry Li Han-ting to a girl from a poor family, so it is because of this systematic abuse that the heroine became so evil in the original plot. Mo Lee added that this lady just wanted to suppress Li Han-ting in everything, so even if Zhang treated them the way they wanted, they still treated her quite cruelly. And to prove this, the girl decided to test this respectable woman by telling the system to watch what John Mo Lee would say to this haughty Mrs. Lee now. Jiang Mo Lee then turned to the woman and clapped her hands, saying that she must also have had a very large dowry when she got married, if Mrs. Lee said so. The woman glared at the young girl with a malicious look, while Li Han-ting at that time laughed heartily at Mo Lee's joke. He said that some people started spending the Lee family's money even before marriage, and then he added that the Lee family had sponsored this woman even longer than her own family, so what kind of dowry could it be? At that time, a woman almost killed her adopted son with her gaze, and the father could not bear such a humiliating insult. So he shouted to his son to watch his tongue because his mother is sitting in front of him, and such statements are simply unacceptable in her direction. Li Han-ting's face changed and suddenly became more serious and tough. He sternly replied to his father that this woman was not his mother at all, because his mother had died a long time ago. The father was not going to tolerate such behavior from his son, so he grabbed a cup from the table and swung. He yelled for his son to immediately shut the door and not say anything to his wife. The cup flew at his son and hit him painfully on the head, even leaving a wound on his forehead. Li Han-ting looked very angry. At that moment, Mo Lee was afraid that a fight would not start. Then Li Han-ting looked at the young girl who smiled sweetly at him and wondered what he should do now. She worried that he would not turn on the rear and defend his opinion to the end. Her appearance calmed the young man a little, and he pulled himself together. Li Han-ting decided not to make a fuss during the family's first meeting with his chosen one. Then Li Han-ting looked at his father and stepmother and said that they themselves asked to bring a girl to the estate, and he followed their advice and did as they wanted. Then he said, as if telling it to Mo Lee, that Mr. Lee had taken the illegitimate son into his house and given him a little company to play with. He usually pays his lessers the same. The young girl smiled and said that there was nothing wrong with that, and she thinks that this is quite a smart and wise decision. Li Han-ting looked at Jiang Mo Lee and asked if she wanted the same generous funding, And the young girl looked at Li Hanting with a tender look and said no. Zhang Moli also added that money is not important in life, but what is important is what others will say about the family, so she considers it a rather good decision. Kistema looked suspiciously at her mistress and said that who could say that money is not important in life, because the biggest spendthrift said that. Miss Li gave a tight smile and said that she had heard that the daughter of the Jiang family was preparing to marry Gu Xiu, so she remarked that she should hurry to get married before her sister. Mrs. Li made it her goal to arrange her adopted son's marriage today. But Jian Mo Li calmly said that it was not her sister who was going to marry Gu Xiu, but her. The father almost burst out of anger when he heard that his son's fiancée was going to marry Gu Shuji. He shouted loudly, "What the hell is going on here, and who will explain all this to him?" Jian Mo Li replied that money rules people's hearts, and there was nothing she could do about it, because Gu Shiji had offered her father too much money, and his father could not refuse. Here, Li Hanting's father couldn't stand it, stood up and slammed his fist loudly on the table. He shouted at the young girl, how dare she even come to their estate and deceive the Li family? That young girl smiled and said that the younger Mr. Li is aware of their love quarrels, and the three of them get along very well, so no one has any complaints. The father looked at his eldest son and shouted, asking if everything she had just said was true. Li Hanting thought that no matter what Mo Li did, she would still be the best match. Therefore, he gathered courage, sat down closer to the young girl, and hugged her tenderly. He then said that he doesn't need anyone but Jiang Mo Li, no matter what she does. The father jumped up from the sofa and shouted at his son that he was the last scum, and his family was not going to bear such shame because of his love intrigues. Li Hanting also stood up from the sofa, looked his father in the eyes, and said that he would not speak about the disgrace, because after his wife's death, he brought his mistress and her illegitimate son to the estate. The father could not tolerate his son's complaints, so he left the room for the last time, shouting that his family would never accept this daughter-in-law, even if he didn't even dream of it. Mrs. Li put a kind of insincere smile on her face and told her adopted son in a caring voice that there was no need to quarrel with his father at such an opportune moment. Mo Li watched without taking her eyes off the stage and thought that she had made the right choice to come here, because there is so much drama in this family that the best TV shows would envy her. The next morning, the young girl woke up in her crib and stretched sweetly. The sun, which broke through the window frames, was already calling her to start a new day. But she did not have time to enjoy her solitude when the system immediately flew to her and reminded her that yesterday she barely coped with the task. Tian Mo Li replied that she had gone to the estate as requested. Disgruntled, the system said that she didn't ask her to annoy the main character's parents, and Zhang Mo Li began to think back to last night when they were alone with Li Hanting. The young man breathed a sigh of relief, and looking at Mo Li, said that this time she helped him a lot, and if she ever needed his help, she could always turn to him. The surprised girl looked at the system and said that this morning she made money from this boy, and in the evening from his parents, and Li Hanting thanked her for something else. Zhang Mo Li smiled and said that she was hungry and offered to have dinner because they had come to his house for dinner. The system roared that the girl had no conscience at all. The young man looked at Zhang Mo Li and asked if she even understood the value of his promises. And then he got up from his seat and approached the shelter of the young girl. When he was very near, he asked if she did not think he had sunk so low that he could do nothing good, and said that the nearer he was to her, the less reciprocity he felt. Li Hanting then looked into Jian Mo Li's eyes and asked if she really liked him, or if she was fooling him when she said those words to him. Mo Li looked at the system with confused eyes and said that the main character had begun to doubt her sincerity, which was already quite risky. The system replied that this was to be expected. Therefore, the young girl decided to correct the situation and looked at the young man, saying that even if everyone turns away from him, she will still believe that he will become the winner. Li Hanting began to approach her and asked if he could count on her liking him. He leaned closer and closer to her lips, and she thought she didn't want to do that. The young girl didn't want to kiss, and she didn't want to die because of an unfulfilled task either. Suddenly, her stomach started grumbling and it stopped. Then Mo Li said that it was just about time for dinner, and Li Han-ting suggested to go to the dining room. And at that moment, the girl breathed a sigh of relief that the accident had helped her avoid a kiss. Jian Mo Li sighed and went out into the corridor. On the way, she told the system that it was her fault, because it was she who forced her to go to that dinner, and because of that, she had to humiliate the main character's parents. The girl also added that it is the system that should know how to change everything, and the system, exhaling heavily, said that yesterday, despite all the force majeure, the task was completed. When the young girl looked into the living room, she almost fell over in shock when she saw who was sitting on the couch. Shen was there, and her father was circling around him, offering something to treat him. This seemed quite strange to the young girl, because Fu Yan Shen was an avid workaholic, and he was usually in his office at this time. She didn't even know what made him miss work. The system began to cry and say that the thief came to kill the thief, and she does not want to leave this plot so early, because she has not yet bought herself a new skin in her favorite game. The girl moved away from the door and did not know whether to go in or go back to her room. But she was noticed by her stepmother, who said that Mr. Fu had been waiting for her since the morning, and he had come to pick her up. The stepmother was quite timid and weak, and although they never managed to get close to Zhang Mo Li during her stay in the estate, she never offended her and always wished her the best. Therefore, the girl did not want to upset her stepmother and decided to go down to the living room. Therefore, she smiled at the woman and said that she was going there now. As soon as Mo Li entered the room, her father began to ask why she allowed herself to be late when such a respectable man was waiting for her. After all, this is simply unacceptable, and he told her to go faster. Fu Yan Shen looked at her, and their eyes met. She didn't know what to expect from this morning meeting. Mr. Fu's assistant asked the young lady if she had breakfast yet today. The assistant then explained that Mr. Fu had organized a whole set of medical examinations for them today, and they had to undergo them on an empty stomach, which was why they had come so early. The assistant asked if she would mind having breakfast after the medical examinations, and the shocked young girl just blinked at her, not knowing what to answer. Her father thought why such a respectable man needed a medical examination, and assumed that he might want to marry his daughter, so he decided to carefully check her health. The father was so happy that such a rich man would become his father-in-law that he immediately took his daughter by the hand and, escorting her out the door, explained that there had never been any genetic abnormalities in their family. As the door closed behind the young people, a surprised Fu Yan Shen asked why it was her father who was so happy and so quick to agree to her medical examination. Jian Mo Li explained that her father was so happy because he couldn't wait to have a son-in-law, which was why he agreed so quickly. Fu asked if he considered him his future son-in-law. After a thorough examination, the doctor informed them of the result that the young woman is absolutely healthy, except for some deficiencies related to her physical exercises. And if you look at the severe pain that Fu Yan Shen reported to the doctor, then, in his opinion, he believes that it is most likely an isolated case of some rather strange coincidence. Fu Yan Shen asked what to do if it happened again. The doctor said that then they should come again for examination, but most likely it is some kind of new disease. The young girl indignantly asked what she thought about the fact that this was a new disease and whether they would offer to name it in her honor. After all, this does not make them any easier. The doctor said that it is a good idea to name this type of disease in honor of this girl, and added that today he cannot help them because from a medical point of view, they are completely healthy. Then the girl winked at Shenya and said that as long as she was with such a strong man, she should not worry about her safety, and she would try not to get into trouble. But Fu Yan Shen said that it was not a defense. Then the young lady asked if she heard what he said, but the young man smiled and said that everything is fine, and he will definitely take care of her safety. He said it so confidently that she really wanted to believe everything. As soon as Mo Li returned home, her father immediately approached her and asked how the medical examination went and what the results were, because he was interested in the question of whether he should discuss the engagement. The daughter smiled and said that she did not remember when she told him that she was going to marry Fu Yanshen, so the father should forget about such a ridiculous idea. The angry father yelled, "What an old man! She first ran after Mr. Li and her family did everything to choose a marriage partner for her, but now she refuses to marry him." The father also added that now Mo Li declares that she does not want to marry Mr. Fu, so what is she trying to achieve? The girl replied that she just wanted no one to tell her where to live. Mo Li added that the family used her two sisters as bargaining chips to advance their own interests, so if they want to succeed with Mo Li's marriage, they should leave her alone. When the young girl entered her room, she saw her younger sister sitting on the floor, and Mo Li asked her what she was doing here and why she was skipping classes again. That stepsister shouted aggressively that Mo Li was no one to control her. Mo Li said that in that case, she would go downstairs and ask Aunt Feng to come upstairs. The frightened sister grabbed Jian Mo Li's hand and said that if she handed it over, she would never forgive her sister and asked her to stay in her room for a while because they were sisters. The stepsister began to cry and Jian Mo Li felt sorry for her, so she came closer to her and sat down next to her. She looked at her crying sister and decided not to give her up, then touched Zhang Han's forehead with her hand and said that she only calls her sister when she needs something from her and asked why she doesn't go to school and learn something. That younger sister pursed her lips and sat silently on the floor, clutching her knees with her hands. Jian Mo Li understood that there would definitely be no chance of a sincere conversation between them today. So Jiang Mo Li left the room, telling her sister that if she didn't want to talk, then Mo Li wouldn't insist, and she could stay here as long as she needed. As she was leaving the room, Mo Li reminded that her younger sister would have her exams very soon, so she couldn't skip school all the time because she would risk failing a year's studies. A system flew up to Mo Li and asked her landlady what had happened in Jianhan. Mo Li replied that she didn't know for sure, but something must have happened to her younger sister at school. The system asked if Mo Li was going to do anything about it, because if he continued like this, the younger sister would fail her school exams. Mo Li replied that if Han didn't want to, then it was useless to help her. Then Mo Li reached out and said that she shouldn't let it go, because this is not the plot she should be promoting here, and now she doesn't want to be distracted, because it's time to dive into the world of games. When Jianhan went to school in the morning, she was met by several girls outside the schoolyard and pushed painfully against the wall. One of them shouted that she had the audacity to frame them. One of the girls stepped forward and shouted at the frightened girl how dare she tempt Lulu's boyfriend, because she belongs to a worthless little family. Jian Han tried to shake off the dirt and shouted that the boy was the first to confess his feelings to her, and she refused him, so you shouldn't distort the real facts. Before she could prove it, one of the girls swung and painfully slapped the poor girl. She shouted, "How dare this wretch open her mouth and contradict her?" And then Liu Qingqin leaned over Jian Han and said that she had two options. The first is that she would now take a few pictures on her phone to capture how Han looked now. Another option is that Zhang Han will immediately call his sister and Zhang Mo will take her place. The frightened girl rubbed her cheek, which hurt incredibly, and did not know what to choose. Liu Qingqin came closer and closer and insisted that Zhang Han make a choice immediately. She especially wished that she would call her sister and call her. At that moment, Jian Han thought that if she called her sister would take her place, and she would no longer be bullied by these girls. But she thought about whether she would do the right thing. And then Jian Han gathered courage and threw the phone that Qingqin was poking at her face and shouted that she will not call her sister because she has no business here. Liu Qingqin got angry and shouted to her friends to hold Jian Han very tightly and said that she is just as stupid as her older sister. The girls grabbed Jian Han and knocked her to the ground. They held her hands and pressed her back so that she could not get up. Liu Qingqin grabbed the phone and brought it to the tearful Zhang Han. She said that now she will turn on the camera and all her peers at school will see these pictures. Jian Han called for help because she did not have the strength to handle the three girls. Suddenly, someone threw a briefcase at one of the girls who was holding Han, and she flew away from the pain. When everyone turned their heads, they saw Yan Mo Lee standing outside, who asked her younger sister why she didn't tell her about it earlier. The system tried to stop Jiang Mo Li because Liu Qingqin is a very cruel character, and she even almost killed the main character. The more she holds a grudge against Mo Li for past fights. But Mo Li just smiled and told her system not to worry about the kid, because participating in the plot against Qingqin is a pleasure, and it seems that last time did not teach her anything. Meanwhile, Qingqin rubbed her hands and said that it was good that Mo Li came in time, because all Jiang sisters are the same and are good at seducing other men, for which they should be punished. Liu Qingqin also added that they had already taken several pictures with Jian Han and suggested that Mo Li join her younger sister in order to take pictures of her in such poses. Jian Mo Li looked into Liu Qingqin's eyes and said that of course she would be happy to take up this offer if Liu Qingqin herself so kindly asked for it. The younger sister tried to save Jian Mo Li and shouted why she came here, because she didn't want to drag her into this mess, and asked her to run away as soon as possible. Mo Li approached her younger sister and said that she had asked her several times not to neglect her studies at school, but she had not listened to her all the time, so she went to check on her studies. Liu Qingqin watched this conversation and told Jiang Mo Li to kneel in front of her as well, because otherwise her girls have strong hands, and she doesn't want them to hurt them. Yan Mo Li turned and looked at Liu Qingqin, who continued and told the girl not to worry, because it was just a couple of shots, and she thought no one would mind. Mo Li was told that they would be happy to fulfill all her wishes, but first before the photo shoot, she would like to ask a few questions, and the first question was, why did they treat Jian Han that way? Liu said that this little bitch seduced someone else's boyfriend, and that's why they're just giving her a lesson in proper behavior. To do this, they took Jian Han to a secret place to teach. Jiang Mo Li then asked if she thought it was normal to treat a person like that. And Liu haughtily replied that although it is not normal, no one can stop her from behaving like that. Then Mo Li took out the microphone from her pocket, showed it to Liu, and said that no matter how she acts, she is still a dumb chicken who doesn't use her brains. Mo Li asked what she thought about if she took this request to the police. Liu shouted that how dare she secretly record their conversation without asking her permission. Then she reached out to the young girl to take the recorder from her, and Jian Mo Li jumped back in time, and Liu Qingqin fell to the ground in anger and hit the asphalt with her knees painfully. Then Diazni Mo Li approached Liu, who was sitting on the ground, and asked if she knew what would happen when this recording got to the police. They would have physical evidence of her crime. Then Jiang Mo Li smiled and said that Liu Qingqin would have to spend her 18th birthday behind bars, and she was worried about what her famous and respected family would think about it. The system flew to its owner and said that it might be worth stopping, because probably the young girl already understood everything. But Mo Li said that she should teach a good lesson today. Liu Qingqin looked at Mo Li and said that she hoped that would not happen, because the prospect of spending her birthday behind bars did not appeal to her at all. Her friends immediately retreated from Jiang Han and said that they were very wrong, and moreover, they would not do this to her sister because they listened to what Liu Qingqin would tell them. The girls begged Mo Li to let them go and not give the recording to the police, and Jiang Han immediately ran to her older sister and hugged her. She was so glad that Mo Li came to help her. But Jiang Mo Li was determined to see things through, so she looked at the girls and said that they themselves should know what to do to be forgiven. The girls both walked up to Jian Han, bowed before her, and apologized for teasing her and tearing up her books, and promised never to do that again. Diaz Han looked at these roaring girls and couldn't believe that they were apologizing to her now, because a couple of minutes ago they mocked her without compassion. The last days were like a terrible dream for the younger sister. She even thought about not only not going to school, but even shortening her life because of the constant humiliation of these girls. They constantly insulted the young girl. Then Jianhan even began to think about the fact that maybe she was really to blame for this. But now they were apologizing to the young girl, and she was 100% sure that it was not her fault that she was bullied at all. Jianhan has faith in himself, and she was grateful to her sister, who helped her now go to school with pleasure and feel completely safe there. An angry Liu Qingqin shouted to Mo Li that her mother would definitely get her out of this mess and not let her go behind bars, so don't let her be happy about her victory today. Jian Mo Li smiled and turned to the girl who continued to sit on the ground and said that behind this apology, she completely forgot about the main character of today's scene. Mo Li walked over to Qingqin, took out her phone and took a couple of pictures, saying that Liu really likes to take pictures of everything, so it would be unfair to leave her out of such cool photos as a memory. Mo Li looked at the photos taken and said that Liu Qingqin even looks quite cute here, although the photos showed an angry, crying, and humiliated Liu on her knees. Liu Qingqin shouted that now Mo Li's end had definitely come, and she would never marry Gu Shu in her life, because Liu would do everything to make it happen. Molly looked pityingly at the crying girl and thought that her roof had finally caved in if she was only thinking about her older brother at such a moment. Jiang Mo Li then looked at her younger sister and said that she thought that Liu Qingqin didn't realize that she had done something wrong, so they should call the police and show this record. The girls immediately started begging Mo Li not to do this and that they would do whatever she asked, and they fully admit their guilt and apologize for her. Mo Li said that in such a case, she would talk to the school principal about them because she believes that their parents should be involved in their education because it is their negligence. Disgruntled parents, who did not know the reason for which they were urgently summoned to the school, were already sitting in the principal's office a few hours later. The director was sweating and did not know how to start a conversation with such respectable parents, so he mumbled and said that the respectable parents were invited because of a very delicate matter. Miss Gu looked at him with her watchful eyes and asked why the parents should be summoned because of their children's innocent play, since these are just children's toys. The father immediately got scared when he heard what kind of families he would have to deal with, and therefore turned to his daughter, saying that there is no need to blow the elephant out of the fly because of children's toys. The daughter tried to explain that it was no fun, and he shouted for her to behave properly. The mother stood up for her daughter and asked how he could say such a thing when she was being bullied. The angry man thundered that like mother, like daughter, and added that they could not keep the Gu family waiting, so they had to resolve this matter as soon as possible. The mother did not agree with her husband, so for the first time in their life together, she objected to him and told him to be patient and wait for all the parents. But when they found themselves in the principal's office, the father still did not stand up for his daughter and told the other parents that the children should figure it out for themselves and that they should not interfere. Liu Qingqin's mother looked at the man with such a look as if there was some nobody sitting in front of her, and she was not going to pay attention to his opinion.